Hey now, we are getting over, and I am the Silver King, Adam Silverstein, here to lead you through these hard times. Dada, with Getting Over's 2024 year in review. And while this may not have been the wildest 12-month span in professional wrestling history, 2022 and 2023 can continue battling over that crown. It was nevertheless as busy as they get. An absolute ton went down over the last 12 months, starting on January 1st, of course. And we're going to take you all the way through December 31st as we break down everything that happened in the world of professional wrestling over the last year. In 2023, on this episode, we recognized that our 2022 show went 2.5 hours. We said we were going to be more expeditious, only to end up going a full 3 hours. So this time we have truncated the show a little bit in hopes of getting you in and out with as much performance-enhancing audio as possible in a reasonable amount of time. But before we get to that, the Silver King does need to remind you that the Getting Over Wrestling podcast
is all about Defy.
So please, folks,
stop being marks for yourselves and go back to being a mark for me.
Go back to being marks for myself, Vintage Chris Vanini, the Getting Over Wrestling podcast. Head over to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating on Apple. Take a little extra time. Leave a 5-star written review. If you do, we will read it live right here on the show. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube at Getting Overcast. Follow us on Twitter at Getting Overcast. Follow us on Blue Sky at Getting Over. The latter two for episode drops, news, analysis, highlights, all of that good stuff. And please also remember,
I happen to love the number 5.
And I hope you do as well. $5 a month, $50 for the entire year. You can go January to January now. You can become an official Getting Overhead. Visit buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Sign up. You'll get bonus audio, the fastest 5 minutes in professional wrestling, instant reactions to every major show, and exclusive news posts on Fridays. Again, that is buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. $5 a month, $50 for the entire year. Please support the continuation of the Getting Over Wrestling podcast. So with all of that said, allow me to actually welcome in Vintage Chris Vanini to our third annual Getting Over Year in Review episode. It's only the third annual because when we started the show, doing an episode like this was never a consideration. However, 2022 was so crazy, and then 2023 was so wild on the back end of that, it has now become a yearly tradition, especially since we once again couldn't even get past January without major news breaking and completely upending both WWE and the business as a whole. Now, the news cycle has slowed down a little bit toward the end of 2024, same thing that's happened each of the last 2 years. But Chris, putting together this year in review every single year, it surprises me how much we forget as the months pass us by.
Yeah, first shout out to you for putting all of this together, because there's a lot of things I forget. I can't remember if something was 6 months ago or 3 years ago. For as long as this podcast typically is, you put even more work into putting it together. So shout out to you on that. This felt like kind of a transitional year for WWE, where we kind of fully closed the book on the Vince McMahon era and moved into whatever this future is. And with the Netflix thing starting in the beginning of 2025, it feels like that's the new future for WWE. And this was a lot of like getting us there.
Congratulations to me.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons these shows are so difficult to do and also so rewarding by the time that we get through them is that there's no off season when it comes to professional wrestling. So unlike even the NFL, and many say there's no offseason in the NFL. There is, even when you have the draft and free agency, there are months at a time where not that much happens. That's not the case in wrestling. You can say it slows down a little bit once football season starts and WWE takes its foot off the gas. This year, they did that again, but not really. I mean, there were some major moments and big shows toward the end of the year as well. So as always, we have a pretty damn comprehensive look at the world of pro wrestling in 2024 for you over the remainder of this program. But before we even can begin breaking down 2024, we actually have to wrap up 2023 in a couple different ways. We taped last year's show a few days before the year actually ended, and there were two notable items that transpired before it concluded. The first was AEW World's End, held on the 30th of December. Samoa Joe beat MJF for the title. Adam Cole was revealed as the Devil, turning heel on MJF. At the time, it was the worst pay-per-view that AEW had put together since it started television. And the Devil storyline just finished its tank with the reveal happening while Cole was still injured. It kicked off what ended up being a really rough year for large swaths of AEW storytelling. But there was more on this day. Andrade rumors began percolating about a return to WWE, and Keith Lee was pulled from the card at the last minute due to injury. He has not wrestled since, an entire calendar year. So, Chris, AEW World's End, notable for more than one reason.
Yeah, I completely forgot that happened. And the fact that we had Adam Cole, MJF at this year's World End,
yeah,
that was a very long time ago.
Yeah, consider that. A whole, 365 days, probably a little bit less than that, but same feud, hopefully concluding at the same show. We'll find out if it actually has concluded. And on December 31st, that marked Kevin Dunn's final day. After more than 3 decades with WWE, our hopes and dreams were partially realized here, more so than we knew at the time. WWE announced the hiring of Lee Fitting 10 days later on January 9th. And obviously, we spent last week's show discussing the controversy surrounding him that hit at the end of the year. As far as what Fitting has accomplished in his actual role, though, there's no question the WWE television product is light years better than it was in 2023. And it has certainly seen even more significant improvement from the decade prior, as WWE simply refused to innovate for so long. And now it feels like every month they're doing something different.
Yeah, production was great throughout all of 2024. They tried new things. They found new things. So much less zoom in and out, crazy cuts. It's much easier to watch. And yes, to repeat, as we discussed last week, The Athletic reported a couple weeks ago that Lee Fitting was let go from ESPN due to basically sexual harassment around the workplace around ESPN and College Game Day. WWE hired him a few months later. WWE has not said anything about it. I think PW Insider and some others have said WWE was aware, but at least in terms of the actual production, it has been much better.
And regarding those production changes, we had the removal of AR graphics, reduced camera cuts. They've changed the set and how prominent it is. They made the barricades and all the lighting around the ring darker to greater emphasize the actual branding of the shows, as opposed to just the color scheme of red for Raw, blue for SmackDown. We, of course, have the tracing camera shots all the way from backstage in the parking lot into the arena. They use the suites more than ever, the concourses more than ever. We, of course, could talk about that for a long time, but this is supposed to be a year in review. But 2023 into 2024 was really the start of these major production changes for WWE, which almost entirely have been well received by fans. Now, at the conclusion of our 2023 year in review episode, you and I each provided 3 predictions for the forthcoming year. Before we get into our 2024 year in review, let's go over those predictions and see where they stand. So let me go ahead and bring in our special guest judge, L.A. Knight, who will grade these predictions as we go back and forth. You will either hear that we were right or wrong.
No.
Let's start with vintage Chris Vanini, who said Raw will stay on USA Network and remain on Monday nights. Well, Chris, you got 23 days into the year until you were wrong on the first half of this one, but I'm not going to give you partial credit for Monday night because it was never actually going to move, which was something that we said on the show. So Raw staying on USA Network?
No.
Nope, definitely wrong.
The Silver King started off with a prediction that AEW will remain completely with Warner Brothers Discovery for all of its content, and it will finally get a streaming deal on Max. Silver King has a 1-0 advantage so far. Chris says Adam Cole will win the AEW championship, possibly even beating MJF for the title.
No.
The Silver King said at least 4 people will hold the WWE championship. I did specify WWE championship in 2024.
No.
What the hell was I thinking? I'll tell you. Okay, the idea behind the prediction was that Roman Reigns held the title for so long that they would go the other way. Cody would win it, lose it, and then win it back. And plenty of times it seemed like that might happen, but alas, it did not, Chris.
And you could even if you counted Kevin Owens holding the winged eagle.
You still don't get there. It's 3. Yeah.
Still don't get there.
And Chris's third prediction, CM Punk will go through 2024 without being suspended or fired by WWE. Now, I know he had been suspended each of the 2 years prior.
Yeah,
this
that was
didn't really feel like that bold of a prediction, you know.
I think it was. Dude, he got in trouble. Like, the AEW stuff was bad, and it happened twice.
Mhm.
Like, when he came to WWE, we was like, holy crap, like, is this going to work? That was what we were feeling.
I guess he was only there for a month, right? At the time you made the prediction.
Yeah,
5 weeks.
We still didn't know what was going to happen. So
fair enough. And the Silver King's final prediction, Sasha Banks winds up returning to WWE in 2024 no later than the Raw after WrestleMania. Nowhere close on that one. Though I did make a prediction for this coming off of Bayley and Charlotte Flair re-signing. Plus, there was news that they had been in talks and she was kind of maybe stepping away from AEW and deciding to go to WWE instead, but they were balking over money. So it was plausible because WWE had a lot of momentum for the women's division at that time. We obviously know what wound up happening. We will get to that in a little bit. So last year, we went 1, 1, and 1. This year, we both went 1 and 2 with our predictions. No surprise because we're just flinging shit at the wall at the end of these shows. Now, we will have some predictions for 2024 at the end, but we will also have another special brand new feature of this year in review. That will be 10 resolutions for professional wrestling in 2025. Not things that we have any control over, but instead things that we want to happen in the world of professional wrestling and we hope will happen in the coming year. Now, before we get to our 2024 year in review, the Silver King does need to remind you that Getting Over has been nominated for Best Wrestling Podcast in the 2024 Sports Podcast Awards. This is indeed the honor that we won a year ago, and we would love to go back to back. So please visit us on Twitter at Getting Overcast and on Blue Sky at Getting Over. The ballot for this award is pinned to the top of our profile on both social media pages. All you have to do is vote for Getting Over as many times as you want, and hopefully we will have the opportunity to go back to back. If for some reason you do not use social media and you just want to find the ballot on your own, you can go to sportspodcastgroup.com, find the ballot, vote for Getting Over. Look, they only mean so much, these awards, at the end of the day, but given the amount of work that we put into this show on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, clearly now on a yearly basis, and how strong we've been going and how much support you guys have given us, it does mean a lot when we get an opportunity to bring home a prize like this. So again, Getting Over, your 2023 Wrestling Podcast of the Year. Make us the 2024 Wrestling Podcast of the Year as well. Vote at Getting Overcast on Twitter, at Getting Over on Blue Sky. You can find the ballot at the top of our profiles. Chris, with that said, let's officially get into the 2024 year in review, and we are going to begin where basically any year begins. Not basically, literally every year begins. January 1st. The Rock appeared on the special Day 1 edition of Raw, calling out Roman Reigns. If we only knew what would transpire over the ensuing 3 months at this juncture. On January 3rd, Kota Ibushi was injured in a really embarrassing match in Japan. He would not wrestle again for 8 months. He's been back regularly since, but he has not shown up again in AEW. On the 3rd, NXT's Charlie Dempsey wrestled for All Japan Pro Wrestling in the Triple Crown, opening WWE's foray into allowing its own wrestlers into Japan beyond the likes of Shinsuke Nakamura and people that had experience there. Later that day, on the 3rd, Deonna Purrazzo debuted on AEW Dynamite. On the 4th, Tetsuya Naito won the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship at New Japan's Wrestle Kingdom 18, and Dolph Ziggler debuted as Nick Nemeth after leaving WWE. The next day, on January 5th, Matt Riddle debuted in New Japan via taped package at New Year's Bash, challenging Hiroshi Tanahashi. On the 5th, AOP returned to WWE TV alongside Karrion Kross after being signed and not used for nearly a year. We also had Tyler Bate debut on the main roster alongside someone who at that point was still known as Butch. On the 8th, we got that incredible R-Truth Live, Laugh, Love Judgment Day video package on Raw. And Chris, I know I just mentioned a lot of items that probably mean more than this individual segment, but consider that this was part of 2024. And I'm just now, as we're kind of going through this review, or really as I created this review, remembering that it was part of the year and how amazing it was. It popped so many people. Truth was incredible as part of Judgment Day.
Yeah. It was one of those things that kind of went maybe too long or once we get to it, but he really freshened them up in a big way. It was great.
On the 9th of January, Tony Khan went on that embarrassing Hook Jinder Mahal Twitter rant. On the 13th, Nick Nemeth debuted and signed with TNA Wrestling alongside Dana Brooke, who's now Ash by Elegance, and Top Dollar after their releases from WWE. Also, Mustafa Ali on the same day debuted in New Japan. On the 15th, Seth Rollins tore his MCL and partially tore his meniscus in that match with Jinder Mahal. That put his availability for WrestleMania in jeopardy just 2 weeks into the new year, and Jinder himself was released 3 months later. Chris, I remember there was an immense amount of concern when Rollins injured himself in that match and trying to project out what he would be able to do and how much he would be able to do. And I think by the time we get to it, when we get to April here on the show, he did way more than any of us could have ever expected.
Yeah, that was kind of a wild thing, how that all tied together. And suddenly you're worried about WrestleMania plans, which would get changed many a time.
Yes.
As we will get to.
For a throwaway match that just kind of happened, for it to go down that way was absolutely crazy. On the 18th, New Japan announced that Kazuchika Okada would not re-sign with the company, one of the most accomplished wrestlers in the brand and country's entire history. On the 23rd, WWE announced that Raw was moving to Netflix beginning in 2025, a realization we are about to experience just days away from it this coming Monday night. The Rock was also announced as joining the TKO board of directors, signing a 10-year likeness deal with WWE while getting the trademarks to many of his own brands. And then 3 days later, just coupling this all together, on the 25th into the 26th, Vince McMahon and WWE are sued for sexual misconduct and trafficking, leading to Slim Jim threatening to drop their sponsorship. That resulted in McMahon resigning from, in this case, TKO for the second time in a year and a half. And this time, he was unable to force his way back into the company. All he has been doing since is selling his stock. But a huge sea change for WWE right before its first major event of the year. As this was transpiring, Chris, as this lawsuit got dropped, I was literally driving a car on my way to Tampa, Florida to go to the Royal Rumble. This was as chaotic a week as I can remember in this podcast. Yeah, WWE got sold. Yeah, Vince initially resigned the first time. Other crazy things have happened over the last couple of years. But for me to be traveling to actually cover an event live and have this happen days after they signed with Netflix and The Rock suddenly got involved in WWE, this was just ridiculous.
This is the first time that Vince McMahon had no power in WWE. Like, even when he had left previously, he was still on the board or had board power, all these things. He had no power after this. This truly was the end of Vince McMahon having any control in WWE. The lawsuit was shocking in its depravity.
Yes.
One of the ugliest things I've read. That is now back to be ongoing now, because it was later on paused due to a federal investigation that's still ongoing, but the lawsuit's back on. That's not going anywhere. And WWE is named. Laurinaitis is named. That could become a bigger story in 2025. But it confirmed a lot of the worst things you used to hear about Vince McMahon. And for it to be laid out in that complaint, the allegations, to be clear, confirmed a lot of everybody's worst suspicions.
Oh, dude, it was so much worse than the worst things that we had heard about Vince McMahon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was extrapolating those to an extreme level. I vividly remember I was sitting in Tampa Bay Brewing Company having a flight of beer and eating probably a burger or something like that, and looking at the document and being like, oh my God. And then I get to the text messages. I'd be like, oh my God, my buddy was with me. I'm like, you got to read this shit. And he's like, what are you showing me? Like, who is saying this stuff? I'm like, well, yeah, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. That's who's saying it. It was absolutely wild. And look, we could spend a lot of time on this, but we had multiple instant reaction shows that we put together, both Royal Rumble weekend and thereafter. Just go into the podcast archive and you can listen to us talk about all of this in much greater detail. On the 27th of January, the Royal Rumble with the Silver King in attendance. Cody Rhodes and Bayley won the two matches. And Cody, of course, made a huge deal to point directly at Roman Reigns, who was watching in a suite with Paul Heyman. Paul Levesque struggled in the press conference after this because he was addressing many of the items that we just discussed. Jade Cargill made her official main roster in-ring debut. Naomi and Andrade returned to WWE. Jordynne Grace of TNA appeared in a surprise. Liv Morgan returned after 6 months from injury. And then CM Punk tore his triceps in the main event. That meant both competitors in the expected night one main event of WrestleMania got injured 12 days apart, and Punk, of course, never wound up competing in the show of shows, the granddaddy of them all. For a Royal Rumble that was not well received overall, I did not find it to be exceptionally notable in any way. It sure as hell was newsworthy.
Yeah, like I'm trying to remember what happened. I remember you were pretty let down after being there. It was newsworthy for how much changed and didn't happen as a result. I remember it was a real solid main event, but Cody to win back to back and to finish with Punk after the way they'd been talking. It was a really good finish to the match.
Mm-hmm.
And then just everything we thought coming out of that.
We made a lot of assumptions that night. We sure did.
Yeah.
On the 29th, Pat McAfee joined WWE Raw as color commentator alongside Michael Cole. A few days later, Corey Graves stepped into the play-by-play role on SmackDown. McAfee is just now returning to that job, of course, as 2025 gets underway, while Graves' future remains undetermined. At this juncture, we will see if he plays into that SmackDown team. That takes us out of January into February. The 2nd through the 5th, starting with the 2nd, Cody Rhodes stepped aside on SmackDown, allowing The Rock to replace him against Roman Reigns, sending fans into a frenzy, kicking off #WeWantCody, and leading to an absolutely crazy edition of Monday Night Raw 3 days later, where fans basically went nuts. It's really the only time over the last couple of years where WWE fans emphatically protested booking that they were given. And if you remember that show, they tried to kind of tiptoe around things and almost dance on one side of, yeah, what we said is happening Friday is happening. And then on the other side of, well, maybe we're actually, teasing you and pivoting and whatever the case might be, but not committing to one or the other. Little did we know what would come after these shows, but this was the most chaotic episode of Raw since the prior Raw after WrestleMania that was led by Vince McMahon, that was completely panned. It was an awful episode. And here we go, and we're thinking, oh my God, it's happening again just after the Royal Rumble instead of WrestleMania.
Yeah, we're thinking like, okay, they had the perfect setup, and they're just changing plans here. And The Rock is getting destroyed on social media and the comments of all of his stuff on Instagram. And I'm thinking like, I don't know if this is a work or not. Because I'm like, why would The Rock sign up to get destroyed by the fans? Surely they had to know the fans would hate this, right? It made zero sense based on everything they've told us. Surely this was fake. And I'm still not 100% sure how much we were worked and not worked. But clearly, clearly, I think it reacted in a way that The Rock didn't expect.
The February 6th episode of this podcast kicked off a string of WWE shows through WrestleMania that I believe, Chris, are some of the best work we've ever done.
Yeah, because that was a real like unknown moment of like what's real, what's not, what's the booking. Are they really going to do this? And people freaking out on all sides. I thought we had really good discussions with that. Those are the kinds of talks that I like having on this podcast, where they're reasoned and deep. And I like to think that's why our listeners like this show.
Sure, but also at the same time, as much as I loved all of that, it took so much energy and brain power to like do those every single week because of how crazy the situation was. I also love a month where we do 2 episodes a week and everything's pretty cut and dried. So, you know, I'm okay with that for a couple months a year, but other months I need regular shows just to keep my frickin' sanity. On the 4th of February, between that SmackDown and that Raw, Rossy Agawa was fired by Stardom despite being its founder and lead producer for 15 years. And just over 2 months later, he started Marigold. 3 days after that, on the 7th, TNA Wrestling fired Scott D'Amore as president after he spent nearly 22 years leading charge there. 8 months later, Maple Leaf Pro Wrestling ran its first event under D'Amore. Crazy to see 2 long-term leaders of top promotions both lose their jobs and start new brands that have largely been successful to this point in an extremely short period of time. The 8th of February is where everything changed. The WrestleMania 40 kickoff event in Las Vegas exceeded even our wildest expectations. Just days after that episode of Raw, with fan protests continuing unabated, WWE completed a total pivot for the main event of WrestleMania 40, with The Rock turning heel, smacking the shit out of Cody Rhodes, and that began 2 of the wildest months of WWE booking in decades. It was also the start of the final boss, which progressively improved with each passing week. As crazy as we felt coming out of the SmackDown following the Royal Rumble and then the ensuing Raw, when this pivot happened, man, it felt like simultaneously an albatross was lifted off our shoulders, where like we felt we were proven right and the fans were proven right and everyone got their way. But we were also sitting there wondering, how the hell could all of this have gone so wrong and then gone so right in such a short period of time?
Yeah, that kickoff show was awesome. Didn't know what to expect. We saw The Rock in a way we'd never seen him. He's dropping F-bombs to Triple H and stuff like that. And it was, you know, they tried to make it feel real. And for the most part, it did, because there was kind of that real aspect of what's going on with the booking. So like everybody was still on the edge of everything. CM Punk, I remember he was on the stage, the kickoff set or whatever, and they didn't know what to say really.
Him and Big E on the panel.
Yeah, on the panel. That was a really awesome event that turned out to be bigger than any of us imagined when they first scheduled it.
And I'll tell you this, the Silver King is going to the Super Bowl this year in New Orleans, and I don't know if WWE is planning to do the same thing, but if they are going to do a kickoff in the host Super Bowl city, I cannot wait to go to the WrestleMania 41 kickoff. Fingers crossed that is actually going to happen. On the 18th of February, Michael Oku versus Will Ospreay, the early frontrunner for match of the year, took place at a Revolution Pro Wrestling show in London. If you have not seen this match and you are going to vote in the 2024 Getting Over Awards, aka
the Meaties,
we posted a free link to this match on social media. It is exceptional. On the 22nd, this one's a little niche, but it popped me and I put it down on my year-end review list. On the WWE Elimination Chamber press event, Michael Cole announced that Pirates forced WWE to divert its sending of the chamber structure from the Suez Canal through Miami and across the country to Los Angeles just to deliver it west instead of east. Pirates. And then the next day at Elimination Chamber, obviously that was a huge moment for Rhea Ripley, but AJ Styles put his hat in the Hater of the Year bucket by flying across the world to cost LA Knight inside the structure. We kicked off March with AEW Revolution on the 3rd. Sting retired after winning the tag team titles with Darby Allin, who leaped out of the ring into a plate of glass for no discernible reason. Will Ospreay also had his debut match as a full-timer for AEW on what was, and still is, one of the most successful pay-per-views the company's ever put on, largely due to the Sting element. On the 6th, Kazuchika Okada made his full-time debut on Dynamite after signing with AEW. He immediately turned heel and joined the Elite. On the 8th of March, AEW fired announcer Kevin Kelly in a somewhat shocking decision at the time. On the 10th, John Cena presented at the Oscars buck naked. The Rock and Bad Bunny also presented together on the show, giving WWE like 3 tangential appearances on one episode of the Oscars, which I just thought was immensely unique. On the 13th of March, Mercedes Moné debuted with AEW on Dynamite, completing the trifecta of major free agent signings by the company. It was strange because she said just days before debuting, and they did this big business special, that she would return to WWE one day. Yeah. So the thought was that this would kick off a surge of interest in AEW. But as we found out, Chris, that did not really end up happening in 2024. They signed all 3 of these talents. They all debuted within 10, 11 days of one another. And that was pretty much it. Like, it was, the debuts were cool, and they now are all part of the company.
Yeah, no, it didn't hit like some of the others when you had the Dana Bryan, Adam Cole type of stuff. It was around WrestleMania. I really do think a big part of that, though, is that at this moment in the year, WWE was crazy hot.
It was.
And as much as AEW can do to boost itself, WWE just has a bigger platform, and it drowns out the competition sometimes.
That is true. Also, Adam Cole came over at the peak of his popularity in NXT. Bryan Danielson came over. He was one of the biggest baby faces in WWE. Will Ospreay and Kazuchika Okada, they're still niche people, or they still were at this juncture, right? Coming over from Japan, largely being famous for what they did internationally and not being, and I don't mean to use the term, superstars, right? To an American audience. They're just really damn good professional wrestlers. They are superstars. But I'm just saying in terms of the casual fan. Mercedes Moné, of course, new name, new company, but well removed from her run in WWE. So she was probably the coolest that she's ever been. And I think that also played a factor in it as well.
Yeah. And they're going up against The Rock. So it's tough.
Right. On the 15th, speaking of, we had The Rock concert, the return of The Rock concert in Memphis. That was held on SmackDown. On the 25th of March, WWE aired arguably the best Raw of the entire year, which featured The Rock absolutely murking Cody Rhodes outside of his trailer to end the show, and LA Knight attacking AJ Styles at his home, along with a blistering shoot Styles segment for the World Heavyweight Championship between CM Punk, Seth Rollins, and Drew McIntyre. It was hard to believe anything would top this over the duration of the year, and it was a tremendous penultimate segment leading into the WrestleMania match between Rollins and McIntyre, with Punk, of course, as the special guest commentator.
Yeah, I mean, that Rock Cody thing, that went so much longer and farther than I expected. And that really amped up the energy. This is, again, where we saw The Rock doing stuff that we haven't seen The Rock do in 20 years, if not longer. Like, even Hollywood Rock didn't necessarily go this far. And this was a Rock who spent so much of the last 2 decades, like, just this good guy image as much as you possibly could have. Didn't hated anything being said wrong about him, so protective of his image. And he's out here doing stuff we haven't seen in forever. He really leaned into the way things turned out, and it made for an unbelievable run. And when I think about The Rock's run here as his final boss run in 2024, it's that beatdown of Cody outside the truck.
Yeah.
That I'm coming back to as something of like, whoa, I didn't expect that.
Look at you now, boy! Look at you now, boy!
I will never forget that, and it is just immense whenever that gets replayed or brought back up. The Rock was on his game, and I still do believe, I mean, there have been shows that have definitely given it a run for the money, and we'll get to them later in this episode. But this was the early frontrunner for TV episode of the entire year. When you put all of that together, there were quality matches on the show as well. On the 26th of March, Becky Lynch joined the Getting Over Wrestling podcast ahead of the release of her new memoir. It was one of our few interviews this year due to a variety of factors. We will be jumping back into those waters with both feet in 2025, but our conversation was immensely newsworthy. Her memoir is fantastic. It was a huge success. And of course, Becky remained heavily in the news through April and May. And even though she has been out of wrestling for the vast majority of the second half of 2024, she's still in the news. People wondering when the hell she is coming back to WWE. That brings us into April. On the 1st, the Becoming Bray Wyatt documentary debuted on Peacock. And that same day, CM Punk did his shoot style interview on the MMA Hour that made numerous headlines. On the 4th, Shayna Baszler made her debut wrestling for Bloodsport while still under contract to WWE. On the 6th, NXT Stand and Deliver was held. Julia made her first appearance on WWE TV in the crowd. We had Obafemi, Dijak, and Josh Briggs, which stood arguably still as the meatiest match of the year. It is nominated for Big Meaty Moment of the Year in the 2024 Getting Over Awards, aka
the Meaties.
And Roxanne Perez won back the women's championship, beginning a reign that has now eclipsed 267 days. Later on the 6th was, of course, WrestleMania 40 Night 1. The Rock, Roman Reigns, Cody Rhodes, and Seth Rollins executed an epic main event. Gunther and Sami Zayn put on another match of the year contender. The Usos disappointed with one of the worst matches of the entire year. R-Truth got his WrestleMania moment. Jason Kelsey surprised, and Rhea Ripley put on a banger with Becky Lynch in the opener. This was not as immense as WrestleMania 39 Night 1, where you were wondering how the hell are they going to follow that on Night 2. This was, of course, the prior year. But this show absolutely delivered, and the way that main event transpired perfectly set the stage for Night 2.
It was a weird Night 1. I was there covering it for The Athletic and Getting Over as well. And this was a really cold night, and it impacted things.
Right. I forgot to mention the weather. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have the Rhea Becky match that was good. We find out Becky had like 105-degree fever or something like that. And we're not really sure the way things are going. Then that tag match, though, ends up being a lot of fun in a way that really built up for Night 2. Like the night itself was like, okay, there's like some good and some bad, some fun, kind of what expected. But when Cody, Seth, and Roman Rock delivered in that main event tag match to set up the next night, that was like oh man, I cannot wait for Night 2 type of moment. It was the first time that these 2-night WrestleManias went like this, where Night 1 played into Night 2. And it made for a really fun feeling coming out of it. And just hoping, if you were there in Philadelphia, that it was going to be warmer on Sunday.
Which does not always need to be the case with Night 1 playing into Night 2, especially the main event of Night 1 playing into the main event of Night 2. But I always love, this happened, I want to say, in WrestleMania 10 as well, where something that happens at WrestleMania plays a role in something else that happens later on the show, like directly. And in this case, the setup is perfect. You could have an opening match for Night 1 be a number 1 contendership for a champion waiting for his challenger on Night 2. Like, it's the perfect way to try to, add a little bit of storyline to a show that is largely match after match after match, which many see as a season finale, even though WWE does not treat it that way. But Night 1 absolutely succeeded to that end. On the 7th, of course, was WrestleMania 40 Night 2, main evented by Cody Rhodes finishing his story, winning the undisputed WWE Championship, defeating Roman Reigns in a match of the year contender with help from John Cena and The Undertaker among surprise appearances in that match. Paul Levesque landing the damn plane on what remains the greatest long-term story in the history of professional wrestling. Drew McIntyre won the World Heavyweight Championship on the show. CM Punk cost him the title moments later, with Damian Priest cashing in Money in the Bank, one of the better cash-ins we've had in a long time. And Bayley won her first championship in years. A tremendous night of professional wrestling. You couple those together, and it is absolutely one of, if not the pay-per-view of the year. Again, will be nominated in the 2024 Getting Over Awards, aka
the Meaties.
But WrestleMania Night 2 will be remembered as the night Cody won the WWE Championship, and it went exactly as we hoped it would. Avengers Endgame style. Perfection achieved.
It's one of those moments I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. Being there as those music themes hit in the main event and being stunned at The Undertaker.
Yeah.
We're all thinking Austin. The crowd is chanting Austin, thinking the glass is about to break. And so while Austin would have been a bigger deal, The Undertaker turned out to be a shock. And we like surprises. And Cody wins, and we immediately get rushed down to the press conference afterward. I think it might have been night one actually, but night one I asked The Rock about Vince McMahon. That became a huge thing on TikTok. Apparently, people kept sending it to me, and then I asked Cody a question in the post press conference. I met Mama Rhodes at WrestleCon and talked to her for a bit for a story in the days leading up to it, and everything about night two was fantastic. The opening was great. I ultimately came away ranking this tied as the greatest WrestleMania of all time with WrestleMania 17. I scored every WrestleMania for the Athletic and tallied it up. I still think I hold. I still think I hold to that, but with time, those things can change as you look back. But they nailed the ending. Pretty much all the baby faces won most of these matches throughout the two nights, and as they kicked off what they colloquially called the Triple H era, it did feel like, this is the start of something new. Cody's the new face. And it was an unbelievable night. And I remember both nights doing half of this podcast on my drive back to the hotel in Philadelphia. One time I got some Taco Bell on the way back too during the podcast. So that was a first, but that was awesome.
Before we fully get off of WrestleMania, just a couple more notes. Cody was the first wrestler since Stone Cold Steve Austin to main event back-to-back WrestleManias as the Royal Rumble winner. Of course, he was the first one since Austin to win back-to-back Royal Rumbles. Bayley won the title as the Royal Rumble winner as well. That is after she set the record for longest time in that match. The Reigns, Rock, Rhodes, Rollins match was the second longest WrestleMania main event in the history of the entire show. And then Rollins, of course, gutted it out, wrestling back-to-back nights, despite being injured and needing surgery going into the show. Interestingly, he was the first wrestler since himself to be in two matches at one WrestleMania. And of course, Cody and Roman did that as well. Gunther didn't just lose his Intercontinental title. His 666-day record reign ended, of course, at WrestleMania. And speaking of reigns, Roman's 1,316-day reign as undisputed WWE Universal Champion was the longest of the modern era, ending a 40-year held record from Hulk Hogan that dated back to 1984. So some monumental moments went down at WrestleMania beyond the fact that we both enjoyed the show substantially, Chris.
Yeah, no, it was a good show, notable moments. Like I said, I think one of the best manias of all time, and it's got the historical significance that could back that up in the future.
It legitimately felt like a sea change in WWE. And that continued actually into the Raw after WrestleMania, which was the first Raw after WrestleMania that felt like a Raw after WrestleMania in a long ass time. 1 year after shit could not have been more bleak. The Monday after the biggest show of the year, this was the exact opposite. It was almost an exultation for fans who serenaded Triple H and Cody Rhodes, who got shown a special retrospective video from Paul Levesque before The Rock came out for another epic face-to-face. You'll remember he clutched the Rolex and put it in his hand, like saying, "I'm not your friend, brother," type of deal. We also had CM Punk attack McIntyre on the show. John Cena showed up, teamed with Awesome Truth. Ilya Dragunov and Roxanne Perez made their main roster debuts. Only Ilya remained called up. And Liv Morgan attacked Rhea Ripley, inadvertently injuring her shoulder and requiring the title to be vacated 1 week later. So you want to talk about momentous Raw after WrestleMania? They absolutely delivered this year in 2024.
Yeah, I think I had been traveling back, so I don't know if I watched the whole thing live exactly how that worked out. But yeah, it felt, after a year prior, Raw after Mania being terrible, this one was much better, and it continued the feeling of like moving into something new.
1 day later, on the 9th of April, Chris Vanini dropped the worst take in the history of this program regarding friend of the show, Samantha Irvin's announce of Cody finishing the story at WrestleMania. I had to get that in there. On the 10th, WWE WrestleMania 40 Behind the Curtain was supposed to debut on YouTube. Remember that date, April 10th. What did debut on AEW Dynamite that evening was footage of CM Punk attacking Jack Perry at All In. And this was meant to be retribution for Punk bringing it up in that interview that we mentioned during WrestleMania week. This also concluded a 2-week span of Dynamite that saw Will Ospreay take a ridiculous shot at Triple H and Adam Copeland cut the end tribalism promo that was routinely mocked. The footage ultimately proved Punk truthful, and it was a disastrous attempt by Tony Khan to pop a rating for this show. AEW did 819,000 viewers for this episode. Real nice rating. It had 800,000 or higher 10 times prior to that in 2024. Afterward, AEW never touched 800,000 again over the ensuing 8 months, and it has not hit 700,000 since the end of September. So an immensely notable moment. I remember being at the Masters in Augusta, not able to watch Dynamite live. I asked someone, please send me a clip of what they do as soon as this goes off so I can watch it wherever I am. I was out having a beer and some dinner super late. It was like 10 o'clock. And I finally get around to watching it, and the eyes could not have rolled, Chris, any further back in my head.
Yeah, I think I may have been on vacation with my family for this one. I remember being around this time. Still stunning that whole thing happened in high. It was at the time.
Such a big miss.
Build up, and it's still wild that happened.
I
don't think that specific thing like hurt AEW at all, but it was a sign that things were not in a good place.
It was a desperate ploy that ultimately worked for 1 week, but did not work afterward. Is pretty much the point. On the 12th of April, Solo Sikoa stole the mantle of Tribal Chief with Tama Tonga debuting in WWE on SmackDown by taking out Jimmy Uso. On the 15th, The Rock said in a social media promo that he had sights set on WrestleMania 41, something worth remembering given the pure rumors about his availability of late. WWE this week also unveiled both sets of new tag team titles. On the 21st, we had AEW Dynasty. Will Ospreay and Bryan Danielson put on a match of the year contender, and there were 5 title wins on the show, including Swerve Strickland becoming the first black AEW champion over Samoa Joe. Jack Perry also returned alongside the Elite, kind of continuing to have that storyline tail off. But that was, I think, the only kind of negative part on the show. Ospreay and Danielson was incredible, and Swerve winning the title was an awesome moment and really a notable move by AEW, not because he was black, but because it actually put the title on a younger talent who was able to do something unique with it. They tried with Hangman Page. It did not work with him. With Swerve, it did.
Yes. It did feel like, all right, here's something new. We're going to a new face, somebody who didn't get enough time in WWE, didn't get enough push. Here's AEW going all in on somebody. And how the reign went, we can get into it when he eventually lost the belt, but it did feel like a big moment at the time, which is why, again, the whole backstage thing didn't derail AEW. It was just a one-time thing. But this felt like, all right, like they can build off of this. That's what it felt like in the moment.
It was fresh and new and exciting and something really worth watching. On the 22nd, Becky Lynch won the Women's World Championship in a battle royal after it was relinquished by Rhea Ripley, and she took that title for the first time. That happened on Raw. On the 23rd, Trick Williams won the NXT title for the first time in the main event of Spring Breakin'. It was necessary for the moment that happening, but Trick proved too green as champion both in that first run and his second run later in the year. On the 24th, Tony Khan took a pile driver in the main event segment on AEW Dynamite. He would then don a kayfabe neck brace throughout the NFL draft as an effort to promote the company. This all went off the rails during an interview on NFL Network when he called WWE evil and the, quote, Harvey Weinstein of professional wrestling, basically leaving the host speechless and ruining all the goodwill he had created from the kayfabe stunt over the entire week.
It was so funny, a great bit. I loved it. And then I was watching that interview as it happened, and I was like, oh my God. And it completely changed the feelings about it. And the hosts had to like turn and try to get into something else. And it was just a real bad look after just a real unforced error.
Totally
unforced. That was really funny.
Completely unforced error. On the 26th and 29th of April, WWE held its draft, and it largely disappointed, with rosters mostly remaining the same despite the extravaganza of the entire deal. It was an improved format, I think we both said at the time. Execution-wise from prior years, it was more reasonable, but it struggled to generate any real buzz because basically nothing changed. Now, between those dates, on the 27th of April, The Rock announced that Drew McIntyre had re-signed with WWE. We are obviously not going to discuss every re-signing on the show. This was particularly notable because it not only came from The Rock, but it also took the wind out of the sails of a potential Summer of Punk storyline that you and I were both, you want to call it fantasy booking, predicting, whatever the case might be. Their feud was great, McIntyre and Punk. We'll talk about that later. but this really felt like a missed opportunity to do something special and interesting. And if memory serves, Rock announced it at like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. It was almost random the way they did it, but alas, it was McIntyre re-signing with WWE, which was a big talking point going into and coming out of WrestleMania that year.
It was. Was that when The Rock gave him a sword?
Well, Rock wasn't on the video, but yes, he had a claymore presented to him that Rock purchased for him.
Yeah, really weird way to do that.
Moving into May, on the 1st, Wes Lee surprisingly returned to NXT coming off a serious back injury. On the 2nd, the Elite attacked Kenny Omega on Dynamite. He would not return to TV for nearly 8 months while dealing with diverticulitis. This was when the storyline really started nosediving even further, with Christopher Daniels stepping in as an interim executive vice president, and it really got all convoluted. On the 3rd of May, Drew Gulak was fired by WWE amid accusations made by Ronda Rousey. And really, once he got fired, the whole story kind of petered out there. On the 4th was WWE Backlash France. And that show surprised with the hottest crowd of the year and one of the greatest of all time. It was particularly insane, of course, for AJ Styles, and one of the most memorable actual non-wrestling moments of 2024. Now, AJ and Cody Rhodes, they put on a bona fide 5-star match in the main event, but the reaction to Styles and Rhodes as well was even perhaps more memorable than the match itself, which is crazy to say. This show also marked the debut of Tonga Loa and that awesome Bloodline tag team match against Kevin Owens and Randy Orton. It started with a brawl. It became a street fight. Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill started their women's tag team title reign. And Backlash was probably one of those shows that you go in, it's a short card. There's not much on it. And it just completely over-delivered to expectation.
Yeah, and more specific on the crowd, it was the phenomenal chant that got the France crowd going that I think WWE just kind of lucked into. For that to be a thing that the fans were crazy over because of some song in France and the phenomenal thing. And then it was the SmackDown before, I think, where they realized it.
Yes.
Because the crowd would react to Cody. And then on Backlash, everybody kind of leaned into it a little bit more. And that's what made it so much better, because you got AJ Styles standing there in the ring with the camera up on his face, and it's just bouncing up and down because the crowd is going crazy. That is one of the images of the year that sticks in my head.
The arena shook from this.
The phenomenal AJ Styles!
I mean, I think we commented at the time, Chris, that it was basically a soccer crowd or a football crowd for you Europeans out there at a professional wrestling show. And that's exactly what it was. They were craziest for Styles because of that song, but they were crazy for everyone really across the entire program. And it just made Backlash France completely stand out. Later that day on the 4th, Las Vegas was announced as the host of WrestleMania 41 during the Kentucky Derby. This also solidified the latest date for a WrestleMania to be held. It's going to go down across April 19th and 20th. Yes, 420 this year. It was just as I had speculated throughout the first quarter of 2024. WWE smartly picked the weekend after the Masters, before the NFL draft and the NBA playoffs. Vegas likely happened due to TKO, but from a timing standpoint, a perfect decision there.
Yes, I'm hoping I'll go. I don't know if I will, but it makes sense. I mean, Las Vegas has been getting everything, Super Bowls, all kinds of stuff. It's going to be a gigantic show. You know, like 40 was a big one, but it feels like 41 doing it in Vegas, they're going to want to make it even bigger.
Like I said, fingers crossed they do the kickoff again in New Orleans. Would love to go to that Super Bowl week. Also on the 4th, Gable Steveson was released by WWE, concluding a massively failed experiment that appeared doomed from the start. On the 10th, Alicia Taylor took over as ring announcer for SmackDown, with Mike Rome moving to NXT. We also learned this week that Jerry the King Lawler's talent contract was not renewed by WWE, though it was believed he would stay with them on a Legends deal. Moving to the 15th, on the back of Eddie Kingston suffering a horrific knee injury at a New Japan show that forced him out of the Anarchy in the Arena match, Darby Allin made a surprise return to AEW about 5 weeks after literally being hit by a bus. This while he was already recovering from a broken foot that forced him to cancel his attempted climb of Mount Everest. It was a big shock, not what anyone guessed or would have expected, given, he had just been hit by a bus, and he previously said his foot would not even heal until June. I obviously had questions about his clearance for this, especially since he then took 2 full months off after Anarchy in the Arena, but the fact that he was able to come back and do that show and step in for Kingston, who of course is still injured, and fingers crossed that he gets back sooner than later, that of course was a significant moment for AEW over the course of 2024. On the 23rd, WWE announced 26 months in advance, mind you, that SummerSlam would become a 2-night event in 2026 located in Minneapolis, basically a make good for taking WrestleMania 41 away from them and putting it in Las Vegas. It was particularly notable as an announcement, given neither SummerSlam 2025 nor WrestleMania 2026 had even been announced yet, let alone other events. I just thought this was wild at the time they did it. It of course made sense given the context that I provided, Chris, but we know where SummerSlam is going to be. Not this August, but next August.
Yeah. And we still don't know how it's going to go because we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
So I'm still a bit skeptical 2-night SummerSlams can work, but it also appears that WWE is giving these to places where they're not going to take WrestleMania.
Right.
And so this is kind of the make good.
I have no doubt that it can work creatively. I do not know that they will be able to sell tickets to the degree they expect to do so, especially here in the United States. But of course, it's a long ways away and we will find out. On the 25th, WWE King of the Ring returned with Queen of the Ring attached. Gunther and Nia Jax won the respective matches, or I should say respective tournaments, kicking off substantial years for both of them. Both tournaments were ultimately successful. That was a huge positive overall. Cody Rhodes beat Logan Paul in a quality match that I would say no one actually wanted. Perhaps most notable was Dominic Mysterio, at the time it seemed, accidentally helping Liv Morgan beat Becky Lynch for the Women's World Championship. But we've had our criticisms about Blood Money in the Sand shows over the years. Chris, King and Queen of the Ring was one of the best ones.
Good show, good winners, good tournaments. So much better than Queen's Crown before that. They got it right, and good step forward.
On the 26th, AEW celebrated its 5-year anniversary with Double or Nothing. MJF made a surprise return on the show, one of like 4 returns he made this year, while Mercedes Moné and Will Ospreay won their first titles in AEW. Anarchy in the Arena was chaos once again, and Gangrel showed up to help Adam Copeland beat Christian Cage in an I Quit steel cage match. Unfortunately, Copeland shattered his ankle jumping off the cage during that match, and he did not wrestle again for the remainder of 2024.
Yeah, Anarchy in the Arena, it was crazy, but it's fun. It's a gimmick match that they still figure out ways to do a lot of creative things. Was this the one where Darby Allin was basically hung over by a long rope, I think? I don't remember if it was that or Blood and Guts, but it was a crazy... another one of those, and Adam Copeland shouldn't have jumped from the top of a cage, even if FTR says he can.
That was indeed the match you are remembering. On the 28th, Ethan Page debuted in NXT, the same show where Jordan Grace from TNA Wrestling made a surprise appearance, and rapper Sexy Red kind of broke the IWC just by showing up. On the 31st, AJ Styles donned a baby blue jacket to reenact Mark Henry's fake retirement on SmackDown, what we colloquially refer to as the Salmon Jacket. He goaded Cody Rhodes into another WWE Championship match. Chris, one of the moments of the year for me, and also something that if you asked me, hey, go write down everything that happened in wrestling in 2024, I probably would have forgotten about just because, it was 6-7 months ago at this point, and it's so you remember the title wins and some of those other deals, but you forget the tentpole storyline moments on television. This absolutely was one of our favorites.
I did forget about this, partly because it didn't get me like the Mark Henry one got me, but it was still good. And it was a good, we thought AJ Styles should have won the title coming in this feud. It didn't
Absolutely,
happen,
yeah.
But AJ Styles was at the top of the card again and performed well.
After this, he absolutely should have won the title. I was okay with Cody retaining at Backlash, even though in the moment it would have been cool for Styles to win. But coming out of the salmon jacket, baby blue jacket, whatever you want to call it, gold jacket, green jacket, who gives a shit? No, but coming out of this, it really felt like if Styles won the title, he could drop it right back to Rhodes. It would make sense. It was a mistake when they didn't have Mark Henry win the title off John Cena when he pulled salmon jacket, and it was a mistake when they didn't have AJ Styles win the title off Cody Rhodes when he pulled baby blue jacket. But it was a shot-for-shot remake and definitely one of my favorite moments of the entire year. Moving into June, on the 9th, NXT Battleground was held at the UFC Apex, a shift in venues. And for me, it was largely a fail as a venue. At least that's my take. The show was not a fail, though. Kalani Jordan was crowned the inaugural Women's North American Champion, and the first ever WWE TNA match was held between Roxanne Perez and Jordan Grace. On the 10th of June, speaking about memorable moments from WWE television, Ricochet was written off with that tremendous attack by Braun Breaker, culminating, I believe it was a spear, into a car windshield. To write him off WWE TV, he told them he was leaving, and everyone knew eventually where he was headed. But that was quite a moment, and if you're going to be written off, better be written off memorably than not at all. On the 14th, Jeff Hardy returned to TNA Wrestling at Against All Odds. The Hardys ultimately won the tag team titles later in the year, as one would expect. On the 15th, WWE Clash at the Castle saw WWE decide not to crown Drew McIntyre in Scotland, with CM Punk returning to screw him out of the title by donning a referee shirt. Cody also won an I Quit match over AJ, an unholy union, somewhat surprised by capturing the women's tag team titles in their home country, a move that was mostly done because everyone else from Scotland who was on the card lost. I still believe to this day, Chris, I maintain McIntyre should have won the title in Scotland, and they could have taken it right off of him the next week on television. Missed opportunity for a big moment for Drew, but I really have no doubts that another big moment will come for him in 2025.
Yeah, I still feel like McIntyre should have won. It felt like going a bridge too far just to keep the Punk storyline going and adding yet another thing CM Punk screws him over with, to the point where we felt like McIntyre was becoming a face at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That was also not a great Priest McIntyre feud build. And we were wondering at the time, like, should we just take the title off of Priest now? It's been a short reign, but not a great reign. Do you abandon him now, or do you try to keep it going? And it wasn't a great leading up to that. They ended up sticking with it, and we'll get to what happened later. Piper also had an unbelievable
with Bayley. Yeah.
Her match with Bayley was fantastic. She was great on the mic at the kickoff event that they did in front of the crowd in Scotland. And that was one of those moments where I'm like, man, like, you could put, the rocket behind Piper and do a lot of things. Like, she's really talented, and her losing that was frustrating.
I feel like that was the week where I know you always liked her, but she really hit for you finally. And I had always told you, like, NXT UK, she was awesome and she's really good. And she just needs an opportunity. And you liked her on the main roster, but I feel like that weekend solidified it for you.
Yeah. Yeah. She's great.
On the 17th, an explosive Raw saw Seth Rollins make a surprise return early from injury for a fill-in feud with Damian Priest. Drew McIntyre quit WWE over the Punk interference, which again would have been better if re-signing his contract had never been announced. And the Wyatt Six debuted with a massacre in gorilla position. Not the best Raw of the year, definitely among the top 10 when it came to major moments. We talked about certain things that happen on TV. We forget about them as the year goes on. There was no forgetting the debut of the Wyatt Six.
Yes, and we thought people were murdered. We thought Chad Gable was shot in the head, it looked like. We weren't sure if Triple H was one of the people who was involved at the time, but it was certainly unlike anything we'd ever seen before. Yeah. That was a really impactful way to make a debut.
Yeah, talk about hitting the nail on the head with that debut. On the 18th, Joe Hendry made his first appearance in NXT. On the 21st, Jacob Fatu debuted in WWE on SmackDown, destroying Cody Rhodes, Kevin Owens, and Randy Orton by himself during his first ever appearance. It was straight up explosive, and on a dime, the new bloodline that we had been real iffy about for a significant period of time suddenly became a force to be reckoned with, I said it at the time, I'll repeat it again, I cannot remember a better debut month for a talent. Moments, sure, Kane, Undertaker, there are numerous debut moments that have been incredible. And this matches many of them, given the caliber of opponent that Jacob Fatu took out. But his first month of dominance and the way he has been booked since debuting in late June, I don't want to say unmatched, but it's tough to match.
I honestly forgot about his debut. He is a big deal and they're handling him well. I'm not yet ready to put his debut or his start kind of in that pantheon with others yet. He can still get there, but they are slow playing him, and I think it's a good decision. But his
they don't have a choice.
Debut, right? But like his debut, I honestly forgot how it happened until you said it right there.
Yeah, they have to slow play him because he's the second guy in the group, right? I mean, Solo Sikoa is being booked as the main dude, so you can't have him overshadow the guy. On the 24th, WWE announced a 2-night WrestleMania, a 2-night SummerSlam, and a 1-night 2025 Royal Rumble, which coming up in a month. That will all be held in Indianapolis over a 7-year span. Apparently, 2 of the site fees were records at the time they were signed. You and I, Chris, were both inquisitive in terms of how this is going to work. Yeah, it's spread out over a significant period of time, but that is a significant saturation of a singular market, and holding a WrestleMania in Indianapolis, as great of a host city as it might be for stuff like, college basketball tournaments and the Super Bowl and whatever the case might be, for an international show like WrestleMania is, putting it in the middle of America is definitely a curious decision.
Well, sort of. I mean, I think I said at the time that the head of the Indianapolis tourism, whatever, the live events, whatever, is a former longtime WWE executive. So they have a deep connection there. They have the connection with Pat McAfee.
Mm-hmm.
And if anyone's gone to a big event that's not in January in Indianapolis, it's a fantastic big event city. I'm going to that Royal Rumble this year. I think it's going to be great. And I think it's important that WrestleManias don't just become coastal type of things.
Yeah, my only question is about WrestleMania because of the travel aspect and how many fans come in from literally around the world for that one show. As an American, for me, going from Florida to New Orleans or Indianapolis is the same thing. Maybe I'm a little bit less excited to go to Indianapolis, although there are great things in Indianapolis and the surrounding areas. It's just not as much of a party city, let's call it perhaps. But it's really the international travel that I'm thinking about. Then again, international fans are getting more WWE than they ever have before, so maybe they're less concerned about that when it comes to WrestleMania. We will find out whenever that ultimately gets booked. On the 28th of June, Kayla Braxton made her final WWE appearance at SmackDown, choosing to leave the company after 8 years and concentrate on other endeavors in Hollywood. This was ironically on the same show that Paul Heyman, her greatest antagonist, was annihilated through a table by Solo Sikoa and Jacob Fatu. Jalen Brunson, and I guess Tyrese Halliburton as well, also appeared in Madison Square Garden for an in-ring segment with LA Knight and Logan Paul. I just bought that Brunson shirt on Black Friday all these months later. This was quite an MSG TV show. WWE is going back for Raw in early 2025, but this one kind of popped up out of nowhere a little bit. Usually those shows get heavily promoted, and despite it not being heavily promoted, they completely delivered. I would say this was most likely a top 10 WWE TV episode of the year, and clearly plenty happened on it.
Yeah, and Halliburton had shown up before,
yes,
in Indianapolis. So to do it this way, to like not at the same level, but be like a Rodman, Karl Malone type of thing. Just
he's the heel and Brunson's the face. Absolutely.
Yeah, was really fun. That was such a cool thing they did.
It was. On the 30th was AEW Forbidden Door. Will Ospreay and Swerve Strickland put on a match of the year contender. Stephanie Vaquer had a breakthrough performance on an American stage against Mercedes Moné. Britt Baker made her first of multiple short, incongruent returns over the latter half of 2024. And Jon Moxley lost the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship back to Tetsuya Naito. He had won it from Naito in April in Chicago and had a 2-month reign, so a lot of jockeying back and forth with that strap. Moving into July, on the 3rd, 84 days after it was supposed to air originally, WrestleMania 40 Behind the Curtain debuted on YouTube, and it disappointed. It barely went behind the curtain. It largely served as a reclamation project for Dwayne Johnson, who was trying to somewhat rewrite history and come out looking like a good guy given the pivot. For as excited as we were, Chris, to see this documentary the week after WrestleMania or 2 weeks after WrestleMania, April 10th, so I guess it was the week after, pushing it 3 months and having it pale in comparison to what our expectations were, I'd say maybe one of the most disappointing moments of the entire year.
Yeah, in amid all the rumors of The Rock like playing a role and it's being edited, stuff that Brian Gewirtz, I think, shot down at times. But then you watch the thing and it's just The Rock saying like,
right,
oh yeah, these are all all these things that got fixed. This is all because of me.
Right.
And
I decided to pivot.
fans.
I realized it needed to be this way.
Yeah, like, good Lord, man. That goes back to that image crafting that he's so obsessed with, which is what, again, made the WrestleMania run so shocking. But then we got this, and it's like, all right, this is The Rock that we've been seeing for the last 10 to 15 years.
It almost took a little bit of the wind out of the sails of that, right? Because we said, look, we heavily criticized his ego, and I went off on it. One of my best rants of the year, if I do say so myself, little Barry Horowitz. The Rock stepping in for Cody, using his star power to upend WWE WrestleMania plans, which was ridiculous. Everyone knew what the fans wanted. And then they did the pivot. And even though I maintained my initial criticism, you and I heavily praised Rock for like realizing that the fans come first and, you know, going along with the change and then morphing into the final boss, which was, I mean, we have a category in the 2024 Getting Over Awards, AKA
the Meaties,
called Gimmick Change of the Year. That's a nominee and it may win. I mean, there's been other great gimmick changes in 2024, but that's the most substantial by far. So he had this reclamation project where, man, all of a sudden the fans started loving The Rock again. They went from consistently booing him to booing and cheering him because they loved the final boss so much. And then he kind of flushed a good bit of that goodwill down the toilet by just taking credit for everything when all the smart fans knew, dude, you're the reason why this happened in the first place. So that was frustrating. On the 6th of July, WWE Money in the Bank saw Drew McIntyre and Tiffany Stratton prevail with the briefcases, only for CM Punk to screw over McIntyre and Seth Rollins simultaneously, mind you, during a failed cash-in attempt. Chelsea Green had the spot of the night with her tumble through stacked tables ringside, and John Cena announced his forthcoming retirement, which would include a one-year swan song tour in WWE beginning this coming week, Raw on Netflix. Solo Sikoa also pinned Cody Rhodes in the 6-man main event on this show. If you asked me off the top of the dome whether WWE Money in the Bank was that memorable of a show, I probably would have said no. Going back through it, and this is just what happens when we do so many shows a week and we talk so much wrestling a year. Going back through it, hell yeah, this was a memorable show. A shit ton of stuff happened at Money in the Bank. And again, I reiterate, because of what CM Punk did with McIntyre at Clash in the Castle, McIntyre could have had the title there and lost it in this scenario. They could have, in fact, had Damian Priest even win Money in the Bank twice, back to back, cash it in here, right? And beat McIntyre back for the title, put them in the exact same spot they would have been, and still gotten Drew his moment. Instead, McIntyre got screwed twice in a row out of the title unnecessarily by CM Punk.
And the John Cena retirement thing came out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he held the press conference afterward where he answered pretty much every single question, including some about, I think, the Vince McMahon situation.
It was the single best press conference appearance anyone made. No surprise it's John Cena. That anyone made all year. It was exceptionally well done. And to your point, Chris, it was because when John Cena went out there, he's like, I'm retiring, but I'm going to still be around. It's going to be my last WrestleMania. But we didn't know whether that meant that would be his last show. So he actually had a lot to clarify. He wasn't very clear when he was in the ring.
Yes. And there were good questions asked to clarify those things. So,
yes, that's true.
Turned out to be a pretty big show. And the farewell tour to this point hasn't yet started, but they're advertising it and it's getting underway. And I'm looking forward to it because all indications are Cena's going to go as hard as he can.
Yeah.
For this final year, and I'm looking forward to it.
It seems like
that will be one of, if not the biggest stories of 2025.
Absolutely. It seems like it's going to be a semi-full-time schedule. I mean, he's going to wrestle at every major show. He's going to be on TV regularly. I don't expect him to be there every single week like a Cody Rhodes or a Drew McIntyre, but I think he's going to be there somewhere between a CM Punk and Roman Reigns schedule. Like if you drew a line right between both of them, that would be my expectation for John Cena. So we'll see if that actually comes to fruition. On the 7th, NXT Heatwave harkened back to the old NXT takeovers. Ethan Page won the NXT title with one of the most inventive finishes of the entire year, concluding a stellar fatal 4-way. Fraxium put their foot in the ground as tag team of the year. And there was a controversial match between Kalani Jordan and Sol Ruka as well. On the 9th, the Rascals briefly reformed in NXT on a show heavily featuring TNA talent. On the 10th, Mariah May turned heel on Toni Storm during AEW Dynamite, setting off what was arguably AEW's best women's feud in the company's history. On the 13th of July, AJ Styles against Naomichi Marufuji for Pro Wrestling Noah, and Io Sky against Utami Hayashishida for Marigold. Both competed in dream matches overseas in Japan on loan from WWE. We had seen Shinsuke Nakamura do that previously. We had seen Shayna Baszler work with Bloodsport, which of course is a US-based promotion, but seeing both of these matches happen on the same day, both were damn good to different levels, was a big, unique moment for WWE. And I don't want to say it cracking open its own forbidden door, but certainly being far more flexible than it ever had been before, with talent working internationally and for other companies besides itself. On the 17th of July, Will Ospreay and MJF had a controversial hour-long match on Dynamite, quality of which completely determinate based on your own preferences. On the 24th, Camille debuted as the heavy for Mercedes Moné in AEW, which ended up as a total failure. And on the 29th, closing out the month, Shane McMahon and Tony Khan met at a Dallas area airport. There was a staged paparazzi fan photo that came out as part of this, and it all appeared to be much ado about nothing, despite there being rumors to the contrary. I would actually say this is one of the stranger stories for 2024.
Yeah, I didn't know it was in Dallas. I should have been there, honestly.
It was at the Arlington airport. It's not DFW, but it's like another.
DFW is right near Arlington. Well, I guess, there's a bunch of private airports. So, I guess it could have been one of those private small airports since it's Tony Khan and Shane McMahon.
I believe it was not DFW. I'm pretty sure it was an Arlington airport of another kind. It said Arlington, the name of the airport.
Yeah, then I used to live in Arlington, so it's probably like that tiny airport that just for private planes and whatnot. But yeah, that was a weird time because it was like, whoa, Tony Khan and Shane McMahon, but also like, why? Like, what is it gonna do? Is like, what are the possibilities here? And turned out to be nothing at this point,
at least so far. But yeah, I always took it from the standpoint of like, even if Shane is on the outs with WWE, it doesn't make sense for him to work with AEW. Bringing him in doesn't help AEW outside of a one-night pop, because people do love Shane, but he can't wrestle, and we've seen him speak, over multiple years, and it's just like, he's not going to manage people. So like, what exactly would Shane McMahon do? Right.
Yeah.
So moving into August, on the 3rd, WWE SummerSlam featured the expected return of Roman Reigns after 4 months away from wrestling, as he went after Solo Sikoa and kind of helped Cody Rhodes retain the WWE Championship. The explosive show also included the implosion of Judgment Day, as Dominic Mysterio sided with Liv Morgan over Rhea Ripley, and Finn Balor cost Damian Priest the World Heavyweight title against Gunther. We also saw Nia Jax win the Women's World Championship, so both King and Queen of the Ring competitors were successful as number one contenders. Plus, Seth Rollins was special guest referee for CM Punk Drew McIntyre, with attention to the bracelet really picking up, and LA Knight got his crowning moment, beating Logan Paul in his hometown. Not the best wrestling show, but when it came to storyline development, SummerSlam absolutely did deliver.
Good show, momentous show, big matches, title changes. Priest Gunther is the thing I think I remember most from this.
Yes.
Because this is where Priest found himself. Mm-hmm. This feud.
The whole feud, yeah.
The whole street rat thing, they figured it out. And in the weeks leading up to it, got incredibly hot. people really got behind Priest to the point where we were saying maybe they should let Priest win this one and then he can lose it some other time to Gunther, because Priest didn't have any big wins really as champion. And it was like, this could be a defining moment for him in his title reign. Ultimately didn't happen, but that was where it was like, oh, like I could see it with Priest now. And unfortunately it came at the end of his reign.
It did indeed, but that feud was great. And WWE, of course, did revisit it later in the year. Now, on the 5th of August, we thought the Raw after WrestleMania was great, and it was, particularly compared to recent years. But the Raw after SummerSlam was exceptional. May have called it a top 5 WWE TV show of all time when it ended. Drew McIntyre and CM Punk reignited with Seth Rollins involved. Bronson Reed wrote off Rollins with the 6 Tsunami spot. Randy Orton confronted Gunther for a rematch of the King of the Ring final where Orton got screwed. And everyone in the Judgment Day, the new Judgment Day, starred throughout this episode. We thought, wow, Judgment Day is going to kick itself into another gear. Little did we know what would happen afterward. But this was a special show and one of our better podcasts of the entire year as well, reviewing it.
Good, great show that really kicked things off, because we also thought going into the fall is often when WWE slows down as they get to football season and they kind of don't go as hard. And this was a show that said, no, we're going to go hard during football season. And they did.
On the 9th, Kevin Sullivan died at age 79. On the 15th, AEW announced that the next edition of All In will be held in Texas rather than London in July 2025. This is the company's first ever American stadium show. Tickets just recently went on sale, and I think they sold about 10,000 off the jump, so pretty damn good start. On the 18th, Zack Sabre Jr. became the first British wrestler to win New Japan's G1 Climax. He eventually would go on to win the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship from Tetsuya Naito in October, which was breaking tradition as he did not save the title match for Wrestle Kingdom as basically everyone before him did. On the 23rd, days after being put into a Reddit AMA, a boneheaded move by the team promoting her new book, Ronda Rousey released as comprehensive an apology as I've ever read, atoning for idiotic comments that she made years prior. I would not normally mention this on a wrestling year in review, but the AMA was held on a wrestling subreddit. This made major headlines, and we actually spoke about it rather extensively on the podcast itself. On the 25th and 26th of August, on the 25th, starting with that, Afa Anawahi died at age 80, 7 weeks after his brother Sika died at age 79 in late June. The next day, Sid Justice died at age 63. On the 25th, AEW All In returned to London for the second straight year. There were 5 title changes on the show, a number of surprises, including the debut of Ricochet, the return of Sting in a non-wrestling role, and Nigel McGuinness actually wrestling. Will Ospreay used Tiger Driver to beat MJF, but the headline was Bryan Danielson finally capturing the AEW championship in a match of the year contender against Swerve Strickland in the show's main event. For me, it was better than the initial All In, even if it was not attended at the same level. And I do believe AEW made a good decision taking at least 1 year break from a stadium show in London going to Texas in 2025. But Bryan's win was indeed one of the best moments of 2024. It is nominated as Moment of the Year in the 2024 Getting Over Awards, aka
the Meaties.
And the match is, of course, nominated for Match of the Year as well. And oh yeah, Jamie Hayter returned on the pre-show for some reason.
Oh yeah, God, I forgot about that. I couldn't believe they did that.
On the 28th, Ilya Dragunov tore his ACL at a WWE house show. This as he was just starting to pick up steam again on Raw. On the 31st, WWE Bash in Berlin featured an incredible Gunther versus Randy Orton main event. Kevin Owens taking Cody Rhodes to the limit. CM Punk and Drew McIntyre putting on a terrific strap match. And Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill winning the Women's Tag Team Championships back. It was one of the best in-ring shows WWE put together all year when it came to consistency up and down the card, and it was another European show that exceeded expectations following Clash in the Castle and WWE Backlash France. I would say this was better, though, than Clash at the Castle, if memory serves. Moving into September, on the 1st, NXT No Mercy had Julia make her official WWE debut, confronting Roxanne Perez after she put on a match of the night against Jada Parker. And Joe Hendry did get to show out against Ethan Page with Trick Williams as special guest referee. To me, Hendry in this match, and then I believe he also got a TNA championship match since then, at some point this fall. It was probably the absolute height of his popularity. He's really petered out over the last couple of months of 2024. Leaves me questioning what's going to happen for him in 2025. On the 2nd of September, Joe Tessitore debuted on WWE commentary, taking over the Raw job with Wade Barrett as color commentator. This as Michael Cole shifted back to SmackDown with Corey Graves. Graves, of course, got removed from the play-by-play role that he was thriving in for the prior few months after Cole basically named him the heir apparent to his position in WWE. And I didn't really talk about this at the time, but that kind of had me wondering whether, like, the Tessitore deal, they didn't think it was going to happen, so they decided that Graves was a great option as the plan B, and then Tessitore kind of came back and they did reach an agreement because they really promoted Graves as a play-by-play man, and he was doing exceptionally well. So for them to do an about face and Graves to either not have a role or potentially be in a 3-man team with Tessitore and Barrett on SmackDown, it's just quite a downgrade from what seemed like a major upgrade for him.
Yes, it's a downgrade for Corey Graves, but Joe Tess has been unbelievable.
He's been great. Yeah.
He's been fantastic. I think I like him more than Michael Cole at the moment. Maybe that's just because it's newer.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just because I'm used to Joe Tess on college football and it all kind of comes together. But he has been really, really good. And he loves it. And I think his energy doing WWE has impacted his football calls where he's going a bit over the top.
He is. Yes. He's been criticized for that recently.
Yeah, but I'm like, no, I like it. He's been great, man. He's been great. I said hi to him at the Big 12 Championship game, which he was calling. He called that game, and Sami Zayn and Jey Uso were there, and the WWE people were like, yeah, we get to watch Joe in his element now. So that's been a home run. That's been a home run move.
I wonder if he might call the Orange Bowl that I'm going to, because that would be a great opportunity for me to speak with him. So I'll have to look into that. But yeah, no, Tess has been a breath of fresh air as a commentator for WWE. And you know what, man? As great as he's done on commentary, when he hosted, and we'll talk about this later, but Saturday night's main event, that was almost an even better role for him.
He's got an old school announcer vibe.
It's the gravitas. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, like a gravitas, a voice of God type of thing that Cole just doesn't always have. Cole's kind of more grounded.
He's wrestling. Michael Cole is a wrestling announcer. Joe Tessitore is a sports play-by-play man. I mean,
yeah,
that's
but
the
he's got that deep voice too that just kind of brings a lot with it. Him and Jesse Ventura opening Saturday night's main event was great.
Yeah. We'll get to that. We're jumping ahead a little bit. Also on the 2nd of September still was when Odyssey Jones got released by WWE following his, I don't want to call it 15 minutes of fame, 5 minutes of fame on the main roster, working an angle with New Day that recently culminated into something significant. And yeah, that changed, massively with Jones not being around, but it worked for the short period of time that it happened. On the 6th, speaking of short re-debuts, Giovanni Vinci showed up on SmackDown. He made 3 total appearances and has not been seen since, which is personally disappointing to the Silver King. On the 7th, AEW All Out was a controversial, violent show featuring Swerve Strickland and Hangman Page going to war in a steel cage match that for some reason included a hypodermic needle. Jon Moxley nearly suffocated Bryan Danielson while starting his Death Riders angle, and there were a couple great matches as well. Will Ospreay and Pac, and Willow Nightingale and Chris Statlander.
This show was so far over the top in a disgusting type of way.
Yeah.
Really uncomfortable to watch. Not fun. Not like shocking. Just frankly disgusting. And they were largely criticized for that, and I think deservedly so. Like, because they stabbed the needle, and then the needle was just hanging there, right?
Right. And it didn't even really factor into the finish of the match.
Yeah.
I guess it maybe incapacitated him a little bit, but it was, I mean, and then doing that and the suffocation on the same show. If you did one and that was like a singularly extreme moment, okay. But it did go completely over the top. I believe I said at the time, and actually I do believe my take on like, what does AEW want itself to be, that I gave on the AEW All Out Instant Analysis podcast. It was one of my favorite kind of individual segments of the entire year on our show. But I'm okay with AEW All Out being a hardcore show, a more hardcore show coming out of All In, which is a, professional wrestling match of the year caliber show. They're trying to just, dominate with the best matches possible, right? That actually allows it to have a stark differential that allows you to say, okay, doing those shows in a 2-week span works, right? In a 3-week span, I should say. They moved it an additional week because they're different from one another. But this was way too far down the line in that direction. On the 9th of September, Gunther confronted Bret Hart on Raw in a surprisingly stellar moment that might have easily gotten lost during a busy year. On the 10th, the Bloodline did a surprise invasion of NXT. On the 13th, Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns teamed up for the first time to conclude SmackDown. They would have the cinematic face-off at Bobby Dodd Stadium, the home of Georgia Tech, 1 week later. On the 25th, the Mr. McMahon documentary was released by Netflix, long anticipated. We taped an entire instant reaction episode that you can find in our archives if you want to hear our detailed takes on the show, but the short version, well done, not deep enough. Later that day on the 25th, MVP debuted in AEW by himself, and September concluded with an edition of Raw on the 30th featuring Last Monster Standing, which exceeded expectations despite Braun Strowman tearing his groin just minutes into the match. This marked the return of Seth Rollins, coming back from the sextet of tsunamis he had previously suffered.
So weird finish to this match that we thought that Bronson should have won. All things considered, because Bronson never got a really big win this year. Because this loss put him into the Seth Rollins feud. So I still disagree with the decision that he lost this match, even though I know it was part of Seth coming back.
And Rollins won their one match, and they were supposed to rematch again, and perhaps Bronson would have won the rematch, but he, of course, got injured, which we will talk about in a little bit. Moving over to October, on the 2nd, this was a busy day. NXT debuted on the CW. Trick Williams won the NXT title from Ethan Page, with CM Punk serving as the special guest referee. This also marked Julia's first title match against Roxanne Perez, the first teases of Delta. Stephanie Vaquer sent in a taped promo, making her first tease on the Go Home show the week prior, and Cora Jade also returned on this episode. On the 2nd as well, AEW announced its new media rights deal with Warner Brothers Discovery, as the Silver King predicted 10 months earlier on this exact show. This ensured AEW would be profitable for at least the next 3 years, so it was a significant milestone for them. And then that night on Dynamite, Shelton Benjamin debuted as a couple major matches. Surprisingly disappointed. This was because AEW had to have a show on Tuesday. They went head-to-head with NXT twice. NXT going on Wednesday one time in November, and AEW going head-to-head with NXT on Tuesday one time in October. On the 4th, AJ Styles returned to SmackDown after nearly 4 months off WWE TV, only to immediately injure his foot and get sidelined indefinitely. One of my biggest what-ifs of the entire year, given there was talk of Styles beginning a year-long run to kind of end his full-time career, which could have potentially happened concurrently with John Cena. Also on the show was the dumpster match between Chelsea Green and Michin, which was memorable. But Chris, Styles coming back and getting hurt right away, it was such a letdown, especially because the match was good.
Yeah, I totally forgot he came back, actually, because it was just for one day. The dumpster match, remember, earlier at Money in the Bank, a lot of people wanted Chelsea Green to win, and she didn't. But she stayed hot, and then this dumpster match happens, and she loses, but she comes out of it hotter than Michin does for winning it.
Yes.
And it was more of a feeling like Chelsea Green's got something going on here, and what are they going to do with it?
It was similar to what happened with Damian Priest, where he didn't win I'm forgetting what it was, but Elimination Chamber or it was some event that people were upset he didn't win, and then he went ahead and won Money in the Bank. And it was like, oh, okay. This is 2 years ago, of course. And it was like, oh, okay, they really do believe in them. They're just doing it at a different time. On the 5th, WWE Bad Blood returned with Hell in a Cell between CM Punk and Drew McIntyre, not main eventing, but nevertheless delivering as a match of the year contender and the best match of its kind in WWE in quite some time. Notable was McIntyre getting busted open hard way, taking that brutal shot on the steel steps at the end to wrap up a feud of the year contender. The Rock came back at the end of the show for a stare down after Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes fought together in the actual main event, though we have not seen or heard from Dwayne Johnson since. Gunther also confronted Goldberg, teasing an expected WrestleMania match, and WWE had a major announcement that was just the Crown Jewel Championships. Fell flat for multiple reasons, but Hell in a Cell itself really stole the show.
The bloodiest match we'd seen from WWE in a long time.
At least a decade.
And deserve it. That's how you use it to make it mean something. And it was a match of the year candidate. We'll get to those in the meaties. Feud of the year ended the way it should have ended. Both guys put on a hell of a show, put their bodies through hell. And it was gnarly, but gnarly in a way that it fit the story and added to the story and closed the story.
It did indeed. Perhaps the biggest headline wasn't even that match or The Rock coming back. It was after the show when Kevin Owens attacked Cody Rhodes outside of his trailer, creating one of WWE's most viral moments of the entire year and continuing the kayfabe 2.0 treatment of storylines that WWE kind of started at the WrestleMania kickoff event. And Owens would do something similar, attacking Randy Orton. I believe it was backstage at a SmackDown a week or a couple weeks after that. And that moment, you and I definitely had our conversations about WWE not doing it on the show itself and, you know, the whole purpose. There's an argument to be made that if this opened the show and you had The Rock and then you did this attack during the show, you could have main evented with CM Punk and Drew McIntyre and got the best of both worlds. At the end of the day, WWE got a ton of social media attention for this, and their feud to this day, ending 2024, going into 2025, remains hot.
It also remains very much online, which still bothers me. And it actually reminds me of something we didn't talk about around WrestleMania, which was AJ Styles and LA Knight getting in a fight at the Media Day event. And I compare it because I was there.
You were there.
Watched the fight happen. It happened right in front of me. I recorded the video and everything. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah.
And it was really hot. And then they basically didn't address it on TV at all.
Yeah.
Going into their match, which was really surprising. So
opposite case here, though. This was very much a part of the TV
opposite case
build.
is where it happens. The entire story starts on social media off of TV. So yeah, it was interesting to kind of do that. Two similar things, but handle them two completely different ways.
On the 7th, Monday Night Raw began a brief move back through the end of the year to 2 hours for the first time in more than 12 years. It is, of course, moving back to 3 hours starting this coming Monday on Netflix. On the 8th, Stephanie Vaquer officially debuted in WWE on the second NXT episode since it moved to the CW. Randy Orton also wrestled Javon Evans on this show. On the 12th was AEW Wrestle Dream. It ended with a controversial angle marking the end of Bryan Danielson's full-time career as he lost the title to Jon Moxley in what many thought was a frustrating match. And then he was ultimately asphyxiated by Mox and the Death Riders, with Wheeler Yuta turning heel. MJF and Adam Cole also returned on the same show, only to immediately feud after it appeared MJF had ended all talk of that happening during his prior return, and Konosuke Takeshita had a great triple threat with Will Ospreay and Ricochet as well. The whole Death Riders stuff with Mox, I mean, it didn't start here, but it certainly took a turn here. And Chris, it just really hasn't hit as this year has progressed or ended.
Yeah, no, I didn't watch this show live. I think I was at a football game or something like that, but saw it from around it. And yeah, it's kind of been in that lull ever since.
On the 18th, Motor City Machine Guns debuted in WWE on SmackDown after weeks of obvious teasers. We'll come back to them momentarily. On the 21st, Samantha Irvin surprisingly departed WWE, with it eventually coming out that she wanted to be an on-screen character in a non-wrestling role and actually did not enjoy ring announcing. This despite her popularity growing immensely over the prior year, WWE featuring her heavily in the months leading up to her departure, particularly at WrestleMania 40. There's still a lot of consternation over the facts of Sam leaving WWE, and we certainly hope to one day have her back on the podcast to discuss all of this. It was an honor for us to be her first ever interview with WWE. I hope she remains a longtime friend of the show, but this was one of the more shocking news items of the entire year, just coming out early on a Monday and then finding out that Lillian Garcia was coming back to replace her. And Lillian, by the way, we haven't spoken about it even on the regular podcast. She's been doing a great job. Rough first night, but ever since then, she's been nailed. So it's great that Lillian's back, but losing Sam was rough and unexpected, and it hit this show particularly hard.
Real unfortunate, because it was right as she was becoming heavily featured by WWE in so many different ways, like ambassador, face of the company type of ways. And then, and to lose her was a big blow. And Lillian Garcia has been good, and Alicia Taylor has been good. But it's also reminded us how Sam was at another level.
She was different.
She was on that all-time level.
Yeah. She was on a run for me, head to head with Howard Finkel as greatest of all time. The fact that her tenure was so short, unless she comes back, which certainly is possible, and Lillian has come back multiple times. If she never comes back, she's still number 2 all time for me, but she's never going to get to number 1 without a longer tenure. You can't be I don't want to say flash in the pan. That's the wrong term. You cannot be somewhere for such a short period of time and be amazing and then compete with someone who's equally as amazing, but was there for decades, and then be put really at the same level as them. So, if she doesn't like it potentially, if that is completely true, perhaps she never does return to that role. She sticks to her guns, but my understanding is the door is always open with WWE. It was, the departure, the split was left with doors open and not a lot of acrimony between the two parties. So we will see what happens in 2025 and beyond when it comes to Samantha Irvin. On the 23rd, Chris Jericho became the Nueve, winning the ROH title for the second time. As promised, circling back to Motor City Machine Guns on the 25th, just a week after debuting and winning 3 total matches in their career, they captured the WWE Tag Team Championships, beating the New Bloodline in a chaotic segment. They got a big-time rub from some of the biggest stars in the company, ended up winning the championships in a surprise match on that show. I think the debut of MCMG, Chris, hit really nicely, but the follow-up with them being champions and then certainly after they recently dropped the title has been quite disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, hot start for Motor City Machine Guns. One of the all-time great indie tag teams or non-WWE tag teams who inspired a lot of the tag team wrestling we see now. And they come in, win the titles, and it feels like, whoa, WWE is like really doing something with them. So at this time, it was a really hot start for them and was really encouraging, even if it didn't later play out that way.
On the 27th was NXT Halloween Havoc, which saw the women steal the show with Julia and Stephanie Vaquer facing Roxanne Perez and Cora Jade. Plus, Kalani Jordan finally dropped the women's North American title, and Fallon Henley finally won a singles title in NXT. Bully Ray also made a surprise appearance. It was a step down from prior NXT events in 2024 overall, but there were still some notable moments. On the 29th, Rhea Ripley was attacked by Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez on NXT of all shows. This because she needed to be written off TV for a fractured orbital socket, though she ultimately recovered from it rather quickly. This was Ripley's 3rd notable injury in 2024 alone. So when we talk about, Liv Morgan's title run and their feud getting extended and all that, we do need to remember, even though this didn't necessarily impact this particular injury, that there were multiple injuries and availability issues that did probably prolong a lot of this stuff. On the 30th, Bobby Lashley debuted in AEW on Dynamite. The same episode, Private Party beat the Young Bucks to win the tag team titles, but more notably, basically conclude the Elite Takeover angle with a big old thud. For Lashley showing up in AEW, their 5th major signing of the year, along with Ricochet and the trio that we mentioned earlier in the year. Again, the ratings aren't changing. Things aren't necessarily moving forward. And Lashley, individually, he hasn't even spoken. Like, he's basically existing with no character on the show. It remains way more frustrating, their lack of booking for Lashley than just comparatively what's happening with MCMG. At least MCMG is on TV weekly. They occasionally get to speak. They've been wrestling. With Lashley, it's just really confusing what's happening over there.
Especially because the first time Lashley left WWE and went to TNA, he was fantastic and really kind of grew as a character and just did a lot of things. He was the TNA champion for a while. He comes to AEW and he's just doing nothing. It's very weird.
Indeed. Moving over to November, on the 2nd, WWE Crown Jewel featured the debut of the Crown Jewel Championships, with Cody Rhodes and Liv Morgan prevailing over Gunther and Nia Jax, respectively. Randy Orton and Kevin Owens never started due to an attack. The titles were large and gaudy, and yet they were left behind, with the wrestlers given rings instead, which have not been seen on WWE TV since. The concept might have had legs if it was executed better, but it was not. It was basically all window dressing to do a couple Survivor Series bragging rights, brand versus brand matches earlier in the month for no reason. Maybe it'll work out long term, but in the short term, it really did not seem to be something that successful, Chris.
I mean, not disappointing. It was just straight up stupid. It was stupid. We thought it was dumb going in, and we came out of it feeling it was dumb as well. And It turns out they're not even taking the belts back with them, that they're staying in Saudi Arabia or something.
And they're not even wearing the rings that they were given instead.
It was a complete blood money, ridiculous thing, joke, and I'm not treating it anything more than that.
Completely agree. Also on the 2nd, Goldberg, during an appearance on SEC Nation pregame show, announced that he will have a retirement match with WWE in 2025. The expectation is that it will be against Gunther at WrestleMania, but certainly that has not been confirmed. On the 4th, Baron Corbin, Indy Hartwell, and Tegan Knox were all released by WWE. Corbin, the most surprising of the trio. The expectation is that they're going to be free agents any day now. Also on the 4th, WWE announced it will be holding a European tour with Raw and SmackDown episodes airing from overseas in March, late during the road to WrestleMania. They'll be airing 6 shows from Europe, 3 live Raws on Netflix, so in the afternoon, and 3 taped SmackDowns at night. I still have a ton of questions about whether this will work, primarily because they want to do all of those premium live events in Europe. So if you're doing this many TV shows, are people still going to pay the exorbitant amount of money to go to those premium live events? That's one. And then 2, given how hot the crowds were last year on the road to WrestleMania, why are you taking those major shows out of the United States and airing them all either in the afternoon or taped? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Maybe we will find out why they're doing it this coming April once it's all over.
I mean, it's not. You're stunned by this, and I'm not. I mean,
stunned.
The European crowds are hot. They always travel.
It's
to Europe
3 straight weeks and 6 shows during their hottest time of the year. And it's not in February, it's in March. I mean,
but they usually do this right after May, or they used to do it right after Mania.
Yeah,
anyway.
after Mania.
It's still a similar time of the calendar, but with the way the crowds have been, with the way it's been going in Europe, they've had very successful shows, ridiculously good ticket sales, and record profits and all that stuff from those trips. Like, why not? I mean, WrestleMania is a global event. They're going to be on Netflix for everying internationally
because you're airing. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but because you're airing 3 taped 3-hour SmackDowns, 3 Raws that would otherwise be in prime time that are instead going to air live in the afternoon, and you're taking those shows out of the United States and putting them somewhere where you've never done this much TV consecutively. You compared it to what's happened in the past. In the past, yeah, they would run like a 2-week tour, but they would only wind up doing like 1 or 2 live shows over there, or I should say TV shows,
which
over
I
there.
Never got.
They would tape. They would tape them in the U.S. domestically, or they would just figure out a way to go back and forth. But this is a totally different concept than anything they've done before.
But we have a longer road to WrestleMania anyway. They've pushed WrestleMania back
2 extra weeks. Like so there's going to be 2 weeks of American TV. Yeah.
So there's essentially 1 less week of American TV on the road to WrestleMania than before.
Because they're taking 3 away.
They're taking 3 away after pushing it back 2. So it's
okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. But it's also the lead up though, right? Don't forget Royal Rumble's pushed back a little bit. There's going to be a Saturday night's main event in January. Elimination Chambers, I think, pushed back a little bit as well. So you're technically correct, but there's also other things to consider as part of that. Look, this is happening in 2025. We'll talk about it more 1 year from now when we do our 2025 year in review. On the 6th, NXT ran a show from the old ECW arena featuring the likes of Rob Van Dam and Francine as part of the broadcast. It was immensely well received with some banger matches, including a 10-woman main event that was awesome. The venue totally delivered as well. This one head-to-head with AEW Dynamite on Wednesday, where Powerhouse Hobbs returned to TV, and AEW centered the Death Riders angle firmly behind Darby Allin on the babyface side. The next week, on the 13th, Jon Moxley was supposed to seize control of TBS for AEW Dynamite. He did not seize anything. On the 15th, Shinsuke Nakamura returned to WWE by attacking LA Knight on SmackDown after 7 months away from TV, despite being healthy and despite continuing to be used at live events. On the 18th, Rhea Ripley returned to join the build for Survivor Series War Games in a mask, just 3 weeks after being written off for her fractured orbital bone. On the 19th, Chase U was compromised to a permanent end by Ridge Holland on NXT, with Andre Chase forced to separate from Thea Hale, Duke Hudson, and Riley Osborne. We saw a brief clip of Chase the following week, but none of them have been on WWE TV since. On the 23rd, AEW Full Gear had Jon Moxley bloody and dismantle Orange Cassidy in a week main event on a show that ended with Darby Allin purposefully getting into a car accident. Bobby Lashley also had his second AEW match, because they gave the first away on TV for no reason, against Swerve Strickland. Chris Statlander put on a banger with Mercedes Moné. Kyle Fletcher upset Will Ospreay, and Big Boom AJ of the Costco guys showed up to draw some viral views. On the 22nd, Paul Heyman returned to WWE after the MSG attack, and CM Punk answered the call on SmackDown as the 5th man to join the original Bloodline for War Games, with Bronson Reed previously siding with the new Bloodline. This concluded weeks of consternation between us on the show about WWE's booking of the Bloodline reunion, specifically the lack of atonement shown by Roman Reigns to Jey Uso and Sami Zayn, plus arguments over whether Punk or Seth Rollins made more sense as the last team member. It ultimately all worked out. WWE introduced the Heyman favor as a story beat the following week. But man, did this, Chris, lead to some hand-wringing on our shows.
I also still think it was the wrong thing to
Oh,
make it
stop it. Come on.
not do 4-on-4.
Okay. Okay, not do 4-on-4. I thought you were going to go back to Rollins being the right person. Okay, no.
Because it looks like we're just not doing that, and we're doing Roman solo on Netflix, and then that might be the end of Bloodline versus Bloodline. So I still think it was completely unnecessary, all to throw a Paul Heyman favor storyline, which I think could be a pretty weak way to get into a CM Punk title match. We'll get there when we get
We'll find out.
But I still don't think adding 2 extra people was necessary. I think it actually took away from the match.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a conversation that we've had, and there is credence to that opinion, no question. I thought you were going to try to support your Rollins.
No, I was wrong. I was wrong.
Thank you very much. On the 25th, WWE announced the Women's Intercontinental Championship just weeks after announcing the Women's United States Championship, giving the company an almost equal number of titles for the men and women, the exception being 2 men's tag team titles compared to 1 for the women. We will finish talking about the Intercontinental title on next year's show in the US in a few minutes. Also on the 25th, AEW announced its Grand Slam Australia show, meant to replace All In for 1 year as an international stadium show, was moving to an arena. Never made sense for AEW to book a stadium in Australia in the first place. The arena show will likely sell out and do extremely well. On the 26th, Gigi Dolan returned to NXT more than 8 months after suffering a serious knee injury. Also on the 26th, just days after appearing at a GCW show, Ricky Starks, who had not wrestled for AEW in 8 months, was pulled from all future scheduled appearances over insults thrown at Tony Khan by one of GCW's main stars. Starks is not being used by AEW. All expectations are he will eventually head to WWE when his contract expires. Khan extended his deal by picking up an option during the year to prevent this from happening. Starks asked him not to, and this is the first of 2 what I think are fair to be called hypocritical moves that Khan made to this end in 2024. November wrapped up on the 30th with WWE Survivor Series War Games. That saw the original Bloodline topple the new Bloodline in a fantastic match that unfortunately included Bronson Reed breaking his lower leg. Jimmy Uso and Tonga Loa also got injured. Jacob Fatu showed out in the match, and momentum built toward a feud potentially between Roman Reigns and CM Punk. The women's War Games match was a surprising disappointment, but Gunther and Damian Priest put on another banger, with Shinsuke Nakamura getting a huge push by beating LA Knight for the United States Championship. Another WWE show that may not have had great wrestling from start to finish, but it absolutely advanced a ton of storylines and provided plenty of entertainment. Moving into December on the 2nd, New Day delivered one of the most shocking moments of the year by turning heel on Big E during their 10th anniversary celebration on Raw. CM Punk and Seth Rollins kicked their long simmering feud into gear during a tremendous segment involving Sami Zayn, Jey Uso, and Drew McIntyre on this show as well. This was another top 5 WWE TV show of the year and 2 of the best segments of the year in the same episode, Chris.
To what I said earlier, WWE really went all out throughout the whole second half of the year in a way that they hadn't in the past. That continued through October, November, December, the heart of football season. And it made for a really top to bottom strong year.
And December in particular was stronger than ever because they were building simultaneously to Saturday night's main event and the Raw debut on Netflix. So they were really putting their best foot forward, in addition to the fact that they had been built strongly throughout the summer and into the fall, more so than ever before. On the 7th, NXT Deadline featured 2 strong Iron Survivor matches, one by Oba Femi, who was a surprise entrant, and Julia. Nathan Frazier wrestled twice in one night as Fraxium continued building their case as the best tag team in the world. This was the final WWE PLE of the year. On the 10th, Shotzi returned from injury to NXT 10 months after tearing her ACL. She teamed up with Gigi Dolan and Tatum Paxley to form a fun trio. Also on the 10th, details came out about Rey Fenix being forced to remain with AEW as injury time was tacked onto his contract, despite the deal for his brother, Pentagon, expiring. Pentagon was teased multiple times in December for a WWE debut on the Netflix opener, while Fenix stood as the second talent being held back from advancing his career by Tony Khan because he has chosen not to remain with AEW long term. On the 11th, Toni Storm returned to AEW after 4 months away following her dropping the title to Mariah May. She wrestled elsewhere during this time, which was kind of odd, but she came back as the rocker version of her character, either suffering amnesia, disassociation, or maybe she's doing an acting role. I know folks love Timeless, but it got long in the tooth for me, so even if it winds up being temporary, I loved that they got this version of Toni back, both in and out of the ring. On the 14th, Saturday night's main event returned for WWE, with Jesse Ventura basically starring on the broadcast. He hosted alongside Joe Tessitore. He also did commentary for the Cody Rhodes, Kevin Owens main event that saw the biggest angle happen after TV ended, with KO hitting that package pile driver to push their feud out to Royal Rumble, and he also stole the Winged Eagle WWE Championship. The throwback look and feel of this show was probably the other MVP, besides Ventura and the Winged Eagle, though Gunther had a great match with Damian Priest and Finn Balor. Io Sky brought the best out of Liv Morgan, and Chelsea Green became the first ever Women's United States champion. This is another situation, Chris, where coming out of it, you're like, hey, not that much really happened. But when you sum it up in just a couple sentences, it was a very busy and momentous Saturday night's main event.
It was, and you and me and some of the listeners debated over whether or not this was a pay-per-view or not, or how we approached it.
Yes.
But it was awesome. I think it was. It was awesome. Ventura was great. Wrestling was good. It was interesting how they approached it. There was a lot of basic storytelling, recapping a lot of feuds before matches. And it was a complete success. And so much so that it's weirdly the next major WWE show that's happening. It's before the next Royal Rumble. So weird.
It is indeed. On the 17th, Ethan Page lost his smile in the same city that Shawn Michaels lost his. But unlike Shawn, Page stole Javon Evans' smile by basically breaking his jaw during an explosive edition of NXT. On the 18th, WWE held a Raw on Netflix kickoff event at WWE headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut. It was not that notable, other than serving as an entry point for us to note that the move to Netflix on January 6th and preceding that, SmackDown moving to 3 hours on January 3rd, are 2 huge news items for WWE already in the first week of 2025 coming up. On the 27th, the final SmackDown of the year, Kevin Owens went after Cody Rhodes' neck, creating the first match booked for the Royal Rumble, still more than a month out. And that actually allows me to circle back to Saturday night's main event, Chris, because this was another situation where they did the package pile driver on SNME after the show went off the air because they couldn't do that on NBC. And they had the hottest part of their feud not happen on television.
Would have been interesting if they did that, if they kept that part on Peacock and they didn't do it on NBC.
That would have been cool.
If you had an overrun on Peacock instead of
like you said, they were going to do a post show, and then that's how the post show began, kind of.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. I just thought of that, but yeah.
Also on the 27th, the final episode of AEW Rampage. Thank heavens. On the 28th, AEW World's End served as the final wrestling pay-per-view of the year. Kenny Omega returned to TV. He presented the Continental Championship to Kazuchika Okada, who retained it over Will Ospreay. That also built the all-in feud between Omega and Okada. That is expected. 3 tremendous tournament matches on this show. Mercedes Moné and Chris Statlander put on another banger. MJF beat Adam Cole, with Cole getting the last laugh and what was hopefully the end to their feud. And Jon Moxley won a 4-way while continuing to lord over what remains a rough main event scene. Also, Adam Copeland returned 7 months after breaking his ankles to start feuding with Mox. On the 30th, the final WWE main roster show of the year wrapped up our top 5 TV episodes of 2024 with an all-time promo battle between CM Punk and Seth Rollins, setting the whole episode on fire. This was the go-home build for the Raw on Netflix, which is absolutely stacked, though Punk Rollins will main event. Whether it will be the first of many matches for 2025 remains to be seen. I did want to end this with one note, Chris. A lot of times during the year, I'll say on the show, man, that was a top 5 episode of the year or whatever. And you always say to me, well, recency bias, right? How can you actually know that? Whatever the case might be, right? As I was putting this show together, I literally came up with 5 episodes, all of which I said were a top 5 show of the year. And I'm sure that was not intentional. Like I'm sure prior years I've said the same thing and I've come up with 6, 7, or 8 or however many. In this case, there were literally 5. And this one for me stood out. The final Raw of 2024 completely delivered, even beyond expectation, knowing it was the go home for Netflix.
Yeah, great show. I have trouble remembering top 5 just because, as you could tell by going through this whole thing, I forget a lot of the stuff that happened throughout the year. So I can't compare the show to a month ago because I don't remember what was happening a month ago.
So we have successfully wrapped up 2024 way quicker than we did the 2 years, by the way. I will consider that mission accomplished. That takes us into 2025 as we will conclude this show the way we began it, with 3 predictions each for the ensuing year. We'll do it exactly the same way. You and I will go 1 for 1 for predictions, and a year from now, we'll find out which of us were right, deserving a and which of us were wrong, of course, deserving a no. We will also have one additional segment, brand new segment, before this show is out. A little bit of a teaser. Make sure you stay tuned all the way through the end. But Chris, let's start with you. What is your first of 3 predictions for professional wrestling in 2025?
Will Ospreay will win the AEW championship.
Do you want to make that any more specific?
No, because I think last year I said Adam Cole would win it, and he didn't. I got that one wrong, so I don't want to get too specific. But I don't think it's necessarily a layup. I thought Will Ospreay should have won it this year, and it didn't. But okay, Ospreay's coming off losing the Continental Classic. Look, we went 1 for 2. Our hit rate's not great. I don't want to make it too...
they're supposed to be somewhat bold predictions, or I don't think this is that bold. I think this is a given for 2025. Really, the question's when, right? Is he going to win it at All In later in the year? Is he going to win it or at the show in London, which is going to be an arena show? A lot of different possibilities, I think.
Yeah, I think in London makes more sense, which is after All In.
But it feels like you want him to do it at a stadium show also. So it's like, what exactly do you do? But, look, Ospreay winning the AEW title, your first prediction. I'm going to make a bolder prediction.
Okay.
John Cena wins his 17th World Championship, and it's a key story point during his final run with WWE. He will accomplish that feat, beating Ric Flair's record as established by WWE at least. Look, Cena's been called the greatest of all time for years now. You cannot exactly hold that mantle without having the most championships.
I thought about something like that. I ultimately didn't because I don't think he will. I think him ending tied with Flair is kind of a sweet spot. But I do think that will be a story, and going for it will be certainly a story. I just don't think he'll get there.
What
But
is-
that's a good bold prediction.
What is your second prediction?
Matt Cardona returns to WWE.
Hmm.
I think I made this prediction 2 years
You
ago.
did. This was part of the, I want to say, 2022 year in review.
And it didn't happen. But I'm coming back to it because he is currently working with Ring of Honor, but he's not under contract. But with Chelsea Green
Yeah.
having the success she is having, bringing him in, I think would be a great way. It'd be a great thing to take her to the next level and elevate him immediately. Like if he returns, like they're immediately a power couple, and I think that would be pretty cool. So
When
he is a free agent, so I think he'll come back.
When she ends her run with Piper Niven, bringing him in and having them doing an annoying couple gimmick, like, pretty much what the Maria, I almost called her Menounos, the Maria and Mike Bennett deal was supposed to be, but more modern than that.
Yeah.
It could absolutely work with those two. There's zero question about that.
And they did it on the Indies for a while. That she was part of what helped
Yeah.
Matt Cardona become the indie god and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
Before she came back to WWE.
So I have a separate prediction for AEW. I believe they are going to run Toni Storm against Mariah May as the final match, the main event of AEW Grand Slam Australia, the first women's main event in company history. I've long thought it would be Will Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher in this spot. The more I think about it, the opportunity is perfect to go with Storm May, especially given where the story sits right now.
I like that. That's a good one. My last prediction. Dana White appears on WWE television and is involved at least briefly in some sort of storyline.
No, I don't know.
Corporate synergy.
Don't even put this into the universe. This is terrible.
Maybe it's at the Apex thing. Maybe he shows up for an NXT.
This is a bold prediction. I'll give you this one. Yeah. Oh, I hate that so much. I really hope that does not transpire.
It feels like a matter of time. I mean, you've had WWE people showing up at the UFC events.
Yeah, but those aren't kayfabe though. Wrestling's kayfabe.
I know, but
oh my god.
Eventually, I think we have the other. We've had these promotions of UFC fighters and stuff and boxers during Raw and stuff like that. They're really slowly pushing that corporate synergy, and it's eventually going to lead to one thing.
I'm disgusted by this bold prediction. I'm going to go with one that is the opposite of disgusting. It is appetizing, and that is Chad Gable winning his first singles title in WWE. That's a general prediction. I'm going to get a little bit more specific. Gable will win the United States Championship, and he might even wind up doing it as a babyface toward the end of 2025.
It needs to happen. It should happen. It should have already happened with the Intercontinental Championship, as we've talked about. U.S. title makes sense, fits into the heel gimmick and everything. I dig it.
So we're going to do an additional segment on this year in review, brand new. We've never done it before. These are our 2025 New Year's resolutions for a variety of people across the wrestling landscape. It can be wrestlers in totality, bookers, brands, whatever the case might be. We have 10 resolutions, 5 each for the Silver King and Vintage. These are items we hope transpire or change within professional wrestling over the next 12 months. Obviously, we have no power to make any of this happen, but these are our hopes, dreams, wants, and needs for 2025. You went first on your predictions. I'm going to go first on these resolutions, Chris. To all wrestlers, stop licking and swallowing your opponent's blood. It's disgusting. It's unnecessary. It's not hygienic, and it does not make you look like a badass. If you want to lick your own blood to show that you're a badass, you get cut, and you want to say, hey, that doesn't bother me, fine. I'll be flexible on that. That's the line. No opponent blood licking, swallowing, or any shit like that.
I very much hope that happens. This one feels more likely to improve, but WWE, figure out how to handle curse words on your television show. It was a disaster when it came to the Rock stuff during that run when the Rock was cursing up a storm. We were just getting black screens and silence and all this stuff. It was a mess. They're off Fox. That helps a bit. Now going to Netflix, you would think there's a lot more leniency with all this kinds of stuff, and it may happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to see it happen before I say that they've fixed it.
See,
So
I
I
think
hope they fix it. They have the opportunity to do it.
I think that resolution should almost specifically be for USA Network. I'm not concerned about that happening with Netflix. Fox was the greatest issue. Like if someone gave a middle finger, they'd black out the screen for 30 seconds. But USA Network was bad. They got better as the year progressed, figuring out how to only bleep the word shit on Holy Shit Chance and stuff like that. So I think that should be directly for USA Network, but okay. WWE as a whole, figure out how to take care of that on behalf of Vintage.
AEW does a much better job of it.
Well,
somehow.
TNT's just there. They say F it. They have a TV 14 and they don't care that it's a ratings thing. They're TV 14.
But they do block some things and they time it up correctly.
Certain words
they just do a crowd noise instead of a cut everything.
It's certain words they still don't say.
It feels like they're prepared for it.
Well, certain words they still don't say, but they let the crowd chant, F words and really whatever they want. It's just performers when they say the F word. It's really the only thing that they bleep out. This one's to Paul Levesque. Allow Io Sky to retake her mantle as the best women's wrestler in the world. To do this, all she needs is time and opportunity. The fans completely have her back. She needs to win the Royal Rumble, take down a major player at WrestleMania. Yes, perhaps even Rhea Ripley, who you refuse to let anyone beat. Let her go on a run now at age 34 before it's too late and she inevitably starts slowing down like we all do. The entire women's division of WWE will be better off for it. You've had the best women's wrestler in the world on your roster for years. And while we have seen flashes time and time again, there has been no extended period of time where she has been allowed to show it.
I like it. That's a good one. AEW, figure out who's planning to do blade jobs in your matches so you don't have multiple or even 3 or 4 different blade jobs on a single pay-per-view. It's too much. You got to some people get it, some people don't. And you got to save it for the biggest moments. That last World's End, it was 3 out of the first 4 matches or something had blade jobs. And it was this is too much. It's not helping. It takes away from all the other matches. Book your cards as if all the matches are related to each other.
I got one for AEW as well. Stop telling us you're the greatest. Just show us. That includes no longer using Where the Best Wrestle, not having Tony Schiavone scream at us 10 times a show about how great the matches are or how incredible AEW is as a country or how much the fans love something. Just be what you want to be and focus on proving that you're the best. Hell, don't even try to be the best. Just try to be great. Be great, and people will watch and attend your shows.
WWE, give us a lot more Jesse the Body Ventura. He was a revelation at Saturday Night's main event, and I'm sure he'll continue to be on Saturday Night's main event. But I want to see just more of him in general. Put him on a pay-per-view kickoff show or something. Just the basics of heel announcing that he knows are so good. Mm-hmm. And he just brings a gravitas to everything in a way that WWE was really missing because it doesn't have full 100% heel commentators. He was a breath of fresh air despite being almost 80 years old. I'd love to see more of him in any way you can find him. He's a legend, and he reminded us why.
WWE, figure out a way to give us more wrestling. This takes 3 forms: matches on premium live events, overall time for matches, and structure of TV. 5 match cards are fine for specific PLEs, such as the Royal Rumble, where you have 2-hour-long matches. Most should have a minimum of 6, with 7 regularly being the key number for big shows, 7 or 8. And those matches, they need time, especially when titles are on the line. WrestleMania 40 Night 1 is a great example. When it comes to TV, with the extra hour on each show, I'm sure more superstars are going to be featured, just like they used to be on Raw, but more time needs to be allotted to matches as well. These shows need to operate as Raw had been earlier this year, where it seemed like we'd get 1 or 2 tentpole matches per show that the wrestlers and fans could sink their teeth into, and then plenty of storylines and a couple short matches as well. It was a great balance. All of this also includes WWE figuring out its advertising situation on TV. Stop giving us 60 seconds of light action, a tope suicida, 4 minutes of commercial, and then 4 minutes of wrestling. That formula does not work any longer. If you do it once a show, okay. If you do it 5 times a show, it gets ridiculous. Figure it out, switch things up. And USA Network, give us as much picture-in-picture as you possibly can. Netflix, I hope it's exclusively that, but I doubt it.
Yeah, they did. I mean, they didn't have that for Netflix, but I like that. That's a good idea. WWE, let us cheer for Chelsea Green. Make her a face, at least for a brief period of time. The State of the Union address or whatever from Chelsea Green after she won the belt, it didn't really work because the crowd wanted to cheer for her. They've been behind her for months, from the Money in the Bank to the to the dumpster match to winning the U.S. title. Like the pop when she won was humongous. People are behind her. Pull an audible. Let us cheer her at some point this year because she has deserved it. She's gotten to this point because she's worked incredibly hard, and we all see it, and we all want to cheer her for it.
WWE, you have an entrance music problem. Fix it. Fix it. Def Rebel does have a fair share of decent themes, unlike some are willing to admit, but the vast majority are dog shit. Sheamus's new music is an abomination. Screaming a catchphrase before playing generic music does not make a wrestling entrance. I always knew it was bad. My eyes were open to how bad attending the Royal Rumble, where half the time I had to look up to the Titantron to figure out who was entering. And I haven't missed a minute of WWE TV in like a decade, if not longer. So it's a problem for me. It's certainly a problem for casual fans. You are $1 billion company. UFC pays rights fees for real music to be used during its fighter entrances. You can afford to use real music, hire better in-house talent, or work with better musicians, especially for your top superstars. It has become completely unacceptable. You must fix this. Create better entrance music.
That's a good one. And my last one, for all of professional wrestling, make better t-shirts. Wrestling t-shirts are embarrassing. They are things that you wouldn't want to wear out in public otherwise other to a wrestling show. And I know the merch numbers are insane. I've gone to WWE and AEW shows and I see people wearing these god ugly shirts that they sell. But get back to making shirts that like are cool to wear. You want to cross over more into mainstream culture. That's how you do it. You still see celebrities wearing NWO shirts or Austin 316 shirts or Rock shirts. We got to find something. Go back, get simpler with the designs. Don't give me this big Ed Hardy type of stuff that we have on all these shirts. These really intricate graphics and things and all that. Like, get back to some simple logos, put them on shirts, make them cool again.
All righty. Those are some damn good resolutions for us on behalf of the world of professional wrestling, WWE and AEW. Let's see how many, if any, are actually fulfilled in 2025. And that officially wraps up our 2024 year in review. And Chris, what an episode it was, breaking down everything that happened in the world of professional wrestling over the last 12 months. But we're actually not completely done, because 1 week from now, we present the 2024 Getting Over Awards, aka
the Meaties. And
the Meaties ballot officially goes out Thursday, January 2nd. We will be posting it on social media. Twitter, @GettingOvercast, Blue Sky, @GettingOver. It will be a Google document form. You will have the opportunity to vote for your favorites across as many categories as we already provided nominees for. Your votes are super important because you have an equal share, along with Vintage Chris Vanini and the Silver King, in determining all of the Meaties winners. I think this year is going to be a little bit more unique than ever before, and we cannot wait for all of you to be involved in that. Speaking of awards, as mentioned earlier, the Getting Over Wrestling podcast is nominated for Wrestling Podcast of the Year for 2024. Please vote for us. We won the award a year ago. We would love to go back to back. I'll make it simple. Just go to sportspodcastgroup.com, find the ballot, find Best Wrestling Podcast. We are the first show on the list. Please vote for Getting Over. Now, before we get to all the reminders to wrap up the show, we have a blistering schedule ahead for you right here on the Getting Over Wrestling podcast. This was our third of 8 episodes in a 12-day span. We have a WWE episode, the final Raw and SmackDown of 2024 in the archives. Make sure you listen to that from earlier this week. We will be back with your NXT AEW show late Thursday afternoon. On Friday, we will have a very special show, WWE SmackDown Instant Analysis, looking at the first 3-hour edition of SmackDown. We'll be back on Monday with another instant analysis for the debut of Raw on Netflix. 1 week from now, same bat time, same bat channel, the 2024 Getting Over Awards, aka
the Meaties.
And on Thursday, January 9th, your NXT and AEW show. That's right. 8 episodes, 12 days. That is the type of performance enhancing audio we bring to you right here on the Getting Over Wrestling podcast. On the way out, a couple reminders. First, that this show
It's all about the five.
Head over to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating on Apple. Take a little extra time. Leave a 5-star written review. If you do, we'll read it live right here on the show. Don't forget,
I happen to love the number 5.
I hope you do as well. $5 a month, $50 for the entire year. You can become an official Getting Over head. Just visit buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Sign up. You will get the fastest 5 minutes in professional wrestling, instant reaction audio to every major show, and exclusive news analysis posts every single week. Again, buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube at Getting Overcast. And as mentioned, follow us on social media at Getting Overcast on Twitter, at Getting Over on Blue Sky for episode drops, news, analysis, highlights, all of that good stuff. You can also send in questions and comments for the show. And as mentioned, you can vote in the 2024 Getting Over Awards, aka
the Meaties.
Thank you all so much for an incredible 2024. On behalf of Vintage Chris Vanini, I hope you all have an extremely happy new year in 2025. For Vintage, this is the Silver King signing off and leaving you with just 3 final words. Bye for now.